Good morning and welcome to the Public Safety and Justice Subcommittee meeting for Wednesday, November 9th. I'd like to call the meeting to order. We have with us our city attorney to go over public comments.
Thank you. Members of the public may speak for up to 2 minutes to comment on agenda items to be discussed. Comments must be related to the agenda item and the action being considered by the subcommittee.
Do we have any call to the public?
Madam Chair, we do not.
Okay. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes of the meeting?
Move to approve.
A second? I'll second them. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays?
Aye. Chairwoman, I do just want to note that for me, at least, the WebEx audio is really bad. It's nearly impossible to hear. Just want to flag for staff.
Is it, Councilwoman Ansari, is it delayed or just hard to hear?
Okay, so something just shifted. It's much better. It was just very low volume. It's much better.
Okay, great. All those in
Thank you.
Did you vote for the minutes, Councilwoman?
Yes.
Okay, great.
And I can hear you all as well now.
Wonderful. So, and do you also vote for the minutes, Councilman Garcia?
Yes.
Wonderful. Motion passes unanimously. We are going to take some items out of order, and we are going to go first to Phoenix Fire Department challenges and mitigation strategies. For that item, we have Chief Mike Duran and Assistant Chief Scott Walker. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for having us here again this morning. Last month, we presented to you on a few items in regards to our response times, call volume activity, as well as some of our hiring for over the next couple of years and our plans for that process is there. A lot of questions came from last month's meeting, and so today we have put together a presentation to answer some of those questions, as well as talk about some of the strategic outlooks for us as far as our long-term plans, as well as some of our prioritization and short-term strategies to help reduce the impacts that we are seeing in our system in regards to our increasing call volume, as well as the activity level. So with that, I have Executive Assistant Chief Scott Walker with us today, who oversees our strategic planning and will be presenting to you today. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Chief Duran. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. Last month, Chief Christ and Chief Gamage provided a comprehensive overview of the challenges the fire department is currently facing and the associated impacts of those challenges. Based on your feedback and your questions, we have prepared this follow-up presentation for you. As a reminder, the fundamental challenges that we are facing include increasing calls for service, daily staffing needs, and increasing response times to emergency incidents. This presentation is focused on what the department is doing to address those challenges and reduce the impacts. I want to start by saying we understand that significant needs exist. For the past several years, we have been and we continue to work to develop solutions to mitigate these challenges. The reality is no one solution will solve all of our challenges. It will take a variety of actions, both traditional and non-traditional resources to meet the needs. We have developed a comprehensive, multifaceted strategy that is adaptable and scalable. As funding becomes available, we will be able to impact and implement a variety of options to have the most impact. Due to the economic downturn that began in 2008, the demand for services rapidly outpaced our ability to keep up. As a result, we must look for innovative solutions that can both reduce the demand for services while we work to increase capacity, basically bringing these two diverging trend lines back together. And in today's environment of competition for resources and funding, we must be objective, data-driven in our strategies and the implementation of those solutions. It is important that we are effective and efficient with all that we are given. I want to start with our short-term strategy, so these would be really about a 5-year time frame or the 5-year window. First, we have created a prioritization plan. This plan is a breakdown of our most pressing needs and what could be implemented relatively quickly to have an impact. It is intended to ensure we have shovel-ready programs if and when funding becomes available. We've increased our training capacity. Because it takes time to hire and train a new firefighter, we are programming additional fire academies into the schedule to ensure we are ready to train firefighters when new positions are added. We've also been able to acquire funding to purchase a new fire engine that will be dedicated to the training academy and trainings for our staff. Our goal is to have no or at least minimal number of vacant sworn positions at all times.
Councilman Waring.
Chief, I guess one thing I'd like to see is sort of dollar values applied to whatever these priorities are. But I'm trying to see how to frame it. And I guess how many people do we think we would be able to help with each item so that there's some sort of way to rank them in this makes sense. We can do this now. I see Inger Erickson sitting in the audience who's now looking up like, why is he bringing up me? It might be a bad analogy, but we had requests for dog parks in District 2. When Inger and I looked up, they're expensive. You know, you got to put in the pipes and everything. But we had one spot that was already wired up for everything, so it was like a third the cost. And it was kind of centrally located. So it served a lot of need at a much lower price, but still accomplished the goal. If there are opportunities for like, you know, for a relatively small amount of money, we can do this. One thing I think of, I look at Lori Bays, is the use of non-police officers to do police functions. It wasn't super expensive, but then it frees up the fully trained people to do other stuff. I kind of doubt, given the nature of your business, there's an opportunity to do that. But I hope you see what I'm getting at. If there's a way to sort of give us some idea, like you can help 500 people for, you know, it's really, you know, without building a whole fire station, here's something you could do right now, Councilman. That would really help me. I'm not articulating this particularly well, but do you think you understand what I'm saying? And is it possible to do what I'm asking?
I do understand. I think we understand that, and Madam Chair and Councilman Waring, the fire chief under his direction has directed us to the prioritization plan concept, which was the first bullet point, and I think that really is what you're asking for. So on that, we've identified our highest priority needs and what we could do in more of a short-term fashion if and when any funding became available to address our busiest engine companies that are seeing the, really, I would say, the most negative impact on response times. So with that plan, it's identified what resources would be needed as far as apparatus, as far as staff, as far as temporary locations, as far as how we could put those units in service into a station and have that impact, and it is costed out accordingly. So we're regularly having those conversations with the city manager's office and BNR and really identifying ways to be creative to get those resources and then be able to put those in the place that will have the most direct impact. So we do have the prioritization plan, and that's something that we could certainly share, and I think it would address what you're asking for. For us, it is our needs are a little more, I'd say, easier in the sense that really they're objective because it really is about response times, which drive apparatus locations and fire station locations, which drives personnel. And so it is easier for us to delineate and really objectively measure our impact. We can do that. And I think the prioritization plan really is what you're asking for.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And Madam Chair, there's one other thing. You really do have a much more linear path. Police, these things can branch off into so many different directions, but you guys, if you can get there fast, that is by definition better and will make the result better. If you could also look at the things you're doing now and see if there's stuff that isn't as, maybe it was great in the 1980s, but now it's not, but it might free up money to do some of this other stuff right now with no new taxes, no moving stuff around in the budget, because we have been able to do that with police, but of course part of that is because we don't have as many officers as we'd like. But there are ways to move money around within the existing structure, like right now, not waiting 6 months, not waiting 5 years. And I think that's what I'd like to see. Again, the dog park example, it didn't solve everybody's problem, but it solved a bunch of people's problems pretty immediately without having to figure out where we're moving money from and so forth. So that's not a bad model for what we're trying to do here. So. No, thank you.
Chair,
appreciate you.
Councilman Waring, if I could just add one point, which Executive Assistant Chief Walker is going to get to in a couple of slides. There are some innovative approaches that we're taking that will relieve some of the pressure on our sworn firefighters. For example, our telehealth program as well as the CAP program as that builds out. So I think there are some opportunities for us to find those low-hanging fruit, if you will, to alleviate some of the pressure on our existing sworn staff while also being able to expand the number of stations and the number of staff over time. So it is a multifaceted approach, and Chief Walker is going to talk a little bit more about that.
And I apologize. It sounds like I jumped ahead. So I appreciate, you'll probably answer more of those questions as we go along. So
No,
but
thank you, Lori. Thank you, Madam Chair and Councilman Waring. I'm happy that we are thinking the way you're thinking and going to be able to answer those questions. And that's what I would say. Most of these, we are doing exactly what you're talking about. We are looking how we can best utilize all the resources we have today. So when we come here, we can tell you that we are most effectively and efficiently using the resources that you and the community has given to us. And when we ask for more, you'll know it's because we need more. So we can demonstrate that. And I think some of the points, you'll see that here in just a minute. So the next item, and these are things on this that we are doing now. So we are doing this with the funding. Most of these are short-term strategies are actually things that are happening now that we've been able to work to get funding from the City Manager's Office or Budget and Research. So these are happening as we speak. The next point I have on here is our ladder company conversion to advanced life support. So what this means is all of our frontline apparatus, engines, ladders, squads that respond to our community on a 911 call will all be trained at the highest level of service we provide. So what this means is when that unit responds, they can meet the needs of that caller, but at the same time reduce the need for any type of secondary response. I know there's a question Councilman Waring asked about multiple resources responding to incidents. This will eliminate the need for those secondary responses. This is something that's ongoing that we will see over the next few years, all frontline apparatus having basically paramedics or advanced life support capability. So that's going to, again, reduce the number of responses by other units. The telehealth, the dispatch nature code review. So this is, again, aligning with Councilman Waring, what you're asking for. Much like the assessment the Phoenix Police Department did with ASU, we are looking at how we are dispatching and responding to incidents. Many of the ways we respond today, we've been doing for decades. Obviously, this is a new world, new activity levels, new technologies, and we're reviewing those nature codes to determine what is the best response to that call. How many units, what type of units, how do we respond to those units? This is going to have a significant and real impact to our own members on the call and workload on our members, but at the same time, making sure units are in service to respond when a higher priority emergency occurs in the system. And so we're excited about what that's going to realize. As Assistant City Manager Bays mentioned, and we've talked before about our telehealth program, so we're in the process of going live with a 911 telehealth diversion program. So this program will allow our dispatchers to divert a 911 caller to a medical professional for a telehealth consult. This program will prevent the need to dispatch a fire unit and really provide that caller with the need, really a better, higher quality service that they need, as avoiding sending a fire truck to a house, taking that person to the emergency room only to get them in contact with a doctor. We can do this now in minutes instead of maybe hours. And so we're very excited what that program is going to deliver.
Councilman Waring.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Chief, just one thing. It's come up with police. Came up with the, I guess, the previous iteration of the record management system that they were using. I think it also came up when there was bidding to do your kind of similar stuff, how you keep your records. Or I can't remember. It's been quite a few years since we had that discussion. But are you engaging the frontline firefighters in what kind of changes we can make? Not so much that they're receptive, but like working with them to make sure that it's acceptable to them in terms of like, this training we think would be helpful, but have you thought about this, chief, or something? Because, no offense, fellas, you guys have been in upper management for a while, so you're not probably riding the trucks every day unless I miss my guess. So sometimes that kind of feedback is helpful. And it has been confusing for someone like me who's not a firefighter. You get feedback from the chiefs, and then you get different feedback from the people who are actually doing the work. We've had that before, and it's awkward because I don't know what to do with that. I don't know enough about the actual day-to-day job. So I assume you're soliciting input and maybe have some committees of frontline firefighters who are participating. Is that a fair assessment?
Madam Chair and Councilman Waring, that is more than a fair assessment. I can tell you that the Phoenix Fire Department leads the nation in our labor management relationship. Under Chief Duran's direction, that has continued, and so all of these type of decisions are made through a very collaborative labor management process where the members that ultimately are delivering service at 2 in the morning to our community are having an input in how we do that. So some of this, the dispatch nature code review, came out of feedback from our members, and so we've taken that, we listen, and we make those changes definitely collaboratively.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief, I appreciate that. I expected nothing less, frankly, from your department, but there have been some times that does happen where you get feedback from the frontline people in other departments as well And that can be awkward. So I really appreciate you doing it the way you're doing it. I sort of expected that, but wasn't sure. So thank you.
Certainly. If I may, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, Councilman Waring, one of our priorities is communications within our organization. We understand that we have over 1,700 members within our, just sworn members in our department. We also have a workforce of over 350 civilian staff as well. So communications is my and our priority as an organization, as leadership up here, supporting the labor management process and communications with our President Willingham and all of his exec team is on a regular basis for us. But yes, although challenging at times for us, that is, every effort is made towards communications with our membership, and so that we are following the process and the needs of our members. And a lot of what's come out of today, or what is coming out of today's presentation, is based upon conversations happening at, we call it the street level. So thank you.
And then the final bullet on this slide is real-time trend analysis. As I mentioned, we have become an objective and data-driven organization. So myself, the fire chief, and others receive daily reports of what's happening in the fire department. So we're getting reports on call volumes, patient transport rates, response times. These things we look at daily, and we make decisions based on this. How can we redeploy resources that we have? Again, making sure what we've given to us, we're using effectively and efficiently. This worked very well a few years ago. We did this with our ambulance, or what we call rescue locations. We were able to look at the system, make some changes that improve response times with our existing resources, again, being efficient. So we are, this is how we make decisions moving forward, is using the data and this trend analysis. Next, we want to talk a little bit about our long-term strategies. So this would be our 5 to 20-year time frame. So in 2020, we developed a 20-year fire station needs forecast. This has really proven to be a strategic plan and a direction tool for us. It's proven extremely valuable as we've moved forward the last few years and looking into the future. This has proven valuable as we look to work with the real estate department to buy real estate or land for future fire stations. It's also helped set us up for the current bond program that's underway to really know what we need, why we need it, and where it needs to be.
Councilman Waring.
Could you, so I doubt that you're going to the state land department and bidding on properties and so forth. That would be prohibitively expensive. How do you site these stations? I mean, how do you physically, like if you want to build a fire station, you have to go buy land. I mean, you have to have some space around it. Is there a certain acreage that you need? Because you start getting into a more dense residential area, it's not going to be that easy to find open vacant properties. I also have found from being on this council that the city has lots of properties all over the place. And when I started, and it's no joke, people at home will probably be appalled, I was, we didn't even know what we owned. That took a couple of years to sort out. I mean, the airport has properties, there were properties all over. Some of them were just remainder lots and so forth. Have you guys looked thoroughly through that list too to see what might be available before we sell it to somebody? Because we do put stuff on the market. We have a realtor who works for us, and people do buy this stuff. So, I mean, how do you cite these things? And do you go for the most optimum, or do you go for the most cost efficient? How does that all come about, if you wouldn't mind?
So, Madam Chair and Councilman Waring, thank you for the question, and a few more bullets. It'll talk about continued collaboration, but I'm happy to answer that question. So the short answer is yes. We look at the city's real estate list regularly. We look for, again, because our stations need to be in a certain area for response times, that helps us more narrowly define where it should go. So we look at existing real estate. For an example, Station 7, which has been proposed in our current bond program, located in the Sunny Slope area. We worked with Neighborhood Services and Spencer, the director herself in that department, identified some land that is currently Neighborhood Services land, but unused, and we actually have, I will call it, first right of refusal on that land, and that's what we're hoping for the future 7, because real estate is a premium, as we know in the city, especially as we do infill. In Councilman O'Brien's district, that area is a real need. I literally drive that area and identify vacant land, identified a piece of property at 39th Avenue and Cactus on the southwest corner for a future station that's needed. That was in the plan, but now with the bond and the Cactus Park precinct potential relocation, we'll probably move to that piece of property. So we're constantly looking where our station needs to be, looking what vacant land exists, looking what property the city already owns, looking, and unfortunately, in those areas, we have to be creative in the stations we build because we won't get a big enough piece of property often. Our perfect piece of property is about 2 to 3 acres for a station, not today's needs, but the future needs, but that's not available in most areas. The Station 13 in Arcadia, that's not going to happen. That station most likely would have to be a multi-story building because we just won't have a big enough piece of property. We're working with the real estate department currently to identify properties that maybe have an existing building on it that may be vacant, that may be purchased, and we can pursue that avenue. So we pursue multiple paths to try to find real estate in the areas we need it so we can secure that real estate today. I've said it before, my goal is to at least have real estate identified and secured for the next person in my role 5, 10, 15 years down the road. So when they need that fire station, they have a place to build it, because that is a challenge we're faced today. So we are addressing all the things I think that you had asked about.
If I could ask a follow-up. So I just think some areas of the city, it's going to be way more expensive to buy the same, or comparable, I guess I would say, piece of property. How do you adjust for that? Or is it just, there's nothing you can do, you got to build the station? So, I mean, the budget, I would think, per station would not be comparable, even if the building that you're building is identical. I assume I'm right about that, right?
Madam Chair and Councilman Waring, yes, sir, you are correct. Obviously, right now, real estate is a premium, and so we factor that in our projections as far as costs and where it is located in the city. How can we, what do we believe, working with real estate, the cost of that land may be? So we do factor all that in our projections and cost projections per station. You mentioned also the Arizona state land, so while we don't go bid, but we also, by working with economic development, Christine Mackey and her group, we know when the state is going to have land coming out. For instance, Station 51 in Councilwoman O'Brien's district, 51st Avenue and the State Route 303, that is our hope and potential, is to locate that station on state land that will be coming out of for sale because of the development occurring as a result of the TSMC chip plant. So all those are factored in. Unfortunately, the costs are today what the market will bear, and if we're buying real estate now, we will have to pay a higher premium than we may have in the past or maybe in the future.
So, Madam Chair, if a developer buys a piece of land, we have big state trust land off of Tatum between Pinnacle and Jomax. So the developer might be told, you got to set aside so much space for a school, and you got to set aside so much space for a fire station. Is that effectively how it works? Do you then pay them for the? I mean, how does that come about?
Well, we're in, Madam Chair, Councilman Waring, we're in new territory where we're exploring these type of conversations early. Again, we collaborate with plan development, economic development, so we know where the city is growing, so we can be part of those conversations long before designs or properties are platted, so we can identify where a fire station should be. And then we've had conversations, is it potential to have the developer provide that land to the city of Phoenix for future impacts, potentially impact fee, set-asides, set-asides for impact fees or different options there. Is there a potential for a public-private partnership with that developer? So those are all things we're exploring as we look to the future, and this is really, we're taking a very broad approach in the best approach and best way to secure land and build stations that really meets the needs of our community.
So and the bigger tracts of land have been slower to go. I think the developers are also like, wow, it's really expensive to build up here, so there hasn't been as much development as you might expect, even in a boom economy. There's still been some, but not as much as you might normally expect to have seen in previous up cycles. But with schools, obviously you're a developer, you're now putting 5,000 more students in the Deer Valley School District or something. That's got to be accounted for. You can't just dump those kids into classes that are already overcrowded. I don't see the fire situation as any different. You're putting in tons of new potential paying customers. We got to do something about that. So frankly, I would appreciate if someone does take down one of these big parcels, would you include me in those conversations so I can talk to them, that, hey, you want to be able to do this, we need a little help too here. Either, we get to buy the property at maybe not quite state land prices, or something like that. We already do it in education, that becomes sort of part of the package. So, but if you guys don't tell me what you're trying to do, then I have no way of being able to help. So putting you together with the right people would sort of be, I guess, a role I would welcome if you'd bring it to me. So thank you.
I think all council members would appreciate that role as well.
Madam Chair, Councilmember, thank you. We appreciate the support. In our monthly briefings, we can certainly let you know where we're looking in your districts and let you know our interest in those properties. And we would appreciate the help and support. The next item was that, in addition to our long-term strategies, is the 23 GO bond program we're currently in the middle of. Currently, the Executive Bond Committee has approved 4 fire stations to move forward at this point in that process. In addition to the current GO bond program, the City Manager Barton has been clear that it is his intention to have ongoing 5-year bond programs. Based on this, our recommendation is that each bond program needs to include 4 to 6 fire stations. Talked a little bit about this already, but continued collaboration. We do and have been for several years working in collaborating with city departments, planning development, economic development, real estate, to ensure we are aware of where the city is growing and going. This allows us to be part of those early conversations with developers to explore the potential of carving out land for a fire station or public-private partnerships.
Councilman Waring.
So, I mean, the fire stations, I assume, because of, it's hard to get people to build them, and it's hard to get, the products to build them and so forth. Everything's going up in price. Any developer can tell you that. How do you price these things out? Because if you say we're going to put 5 into this bond program, we can't go back to voters and say, oh, you know what? So sorry, we only built 3. And I know you were thinking when you voted for it, there was going to be one in your neighborhood because it was on this list, but now it didn't happen. Can't really do that. That would be awkward. So how do you know how much to put in that's going to for sure cover the costs necessary?
Madam Chair and Councilman Waring, we are in the process of building Fire Station 62 in the southwest portion of the valley, so we have some real-time information on today's costs based on inflation, based on escalators. We have built in escalators, a monthly escalator rate into the cost of that station that we've shared with the City Manager's Office and Budget and Research. As we look to the future, what we put forth in the bond program, we included escalators in that to get a more, at least as most realistic estimate of the cost of that station. If you've seen on that, those numbers are much higher than we would certainly like to pay to build a station, and certainly much higher than we've paid in the past. For instance, in both of adjoining both of your council districts, Station 55 was built just a few years ago, much lower cost. But the reality is today, with inflation, with supply chain issues, costs are up. We are projecting and building in escalators best we can, so that issue you presented does not happen. We want to be able to build the stations we say we're going to build, and we're doing our very best on working with the Budget and Research Department to forecast that into the cost of our projects.
And I understand it's a really tough, it's almost an unfair question because things are changing so rapidly. 2 years ago, this economy and inflation, it's almost totally unrecognizable from what was, pre-COVID. But so I appreciate your dilemma. I just want to make sure that it sounds like you're working with finance and so forth to make sure that you're at least making the best guesstimate that you can. But I do understand it's a guesstimate, not a hard and fast line in the sand. So thank you.
Thank you. And then on this slide, the last bullet point is continuous improvement. In today's rapidly changing environment, touching on what we've already talked a little bit about, in today's rapidly changing environment, we must always push ourselves to improve. The world is rapidly changing. Status quo is not an option. We are always exploring new options and ways to deliver service. So this next slide is a direct answer to the question, and from Madam Chair, from you specifically, is what would it take to meet the NFPA 5-minute response standard? So I think it's important to note that the NFPA standard is an objective standard that is based on multiple factors that are all focused on ensuring that we, or the fire service, when we arrive, we can have an impact on that emergency incident. This is a standard we should strive for, but we'll acknowledge that it is a high bar for any community to meet. But based on your question, what would it take for us to come at least closer to, if not achieve the 5-minute standard within the city of Phoenix? We did an assessment of our current resources, our current population, did take some assumptions for population growth, but this is based on more the near future than the out years. Based on that, we would need to build 14 new fire stations within the city of Phoenix. The cost of that would be $252 million based on our best estimate for future costs. We need to add an additional purchase of 33 new fire apparatus to the system. That would be a cost of $22 million. We would need to increase our sworn full-time employee count by 406 members. That would be a cost of $62 million. We would need to increase our non-sworn full-time employee count by 45. That would be a cost of $3.6 million. We would need to budget for the additional training and equipment for all these firefighters and to train these firefighters. That would be an estimated cost of $3 million. So the total cost, if we were able to do this today, would be and I'll round up as City Manager Barton does, $343 million, with an ongoing cost of $66 million for personnel costs. And because it takes time to hire firefighters, train firefighters, build fire stations, and buy apparatus, we would believe that it would take us 8 to 10 years to implement this plan if you gave us the funding today. Now, as we work through each year, we would be gaining resource in the system, so it would be direct impacts year over year, but to be fully realized, we believe it would take us 8 to 10 years to meet this objective. So while the previous slide demonstrated what it would take to achieve the 5-minute response time, this table is a breakdown of what can be accomplished over the next 20 years with a consistent bond program plan. As City Manager Barton has talked about having these consistent 5-year bond programs. And so if you look at this table, as you can see, based on this consistent bond programs, the fire department would increase by 20 new fire stations over the next 2 decades. We would add 45 new fire apparatus into the system, and we would increase by 607 new full-time employee counts over the next 20 years. Again, as we started construction and adding these resources, we would see direct impacts to service delivery, reduction in response times, increased service delivery to the community over the next 2 decades.
Chief Walker, but you said 20 new fire stations. They're not all new, right? I mean, 7 is we're not getting a new 7, we're replacing 7 or upgrading 7.
Madam Chair, that's correct. I apologize. Some of these, Station 7, Station 13, 15, would be replacements. They'd be a new building, a larger building that would allow more apparatus to be placed in the building, but they would be a replacement of an existing station. Now, currently, our plan is for Station 7 and 13, 15 to repurpose those buildings for our community assistance program.
So given what would it take to meet the NFPA standards, and then and you said if you were given the $342 million today, it would still take 8 to 10 years. So if we're looking at having our stations come over 20 years, what are our times going to look like potentially for response?
Madam Chair, on that, our prioritization plan is our short-term or our gap solution that Chief Duran has directed to be designed, and so that's where, as we gain positions in each year, or as we gain money or funding for an apparatus or 2, we know where we can use that to really have that direct impact on our highest concern areas, the areas like Station 7, Station 13, or areas that maybe are expanding without coverage. So that's the gap solution is a prioritization plan. Unfortunately, to tell you definitively where our response times will be, it is really hard to make that estimate, though we are, I believe, with our plan, we can work to hold the line, if you would, but we would anticipate if without support, obviously response times will continue to creep up as we've seen over the last several years.
And what's our current response time average right now?
When we collect the response time and wayward reporting is if our engines, our ladders, our squads, and our rescues, our ambulance, when we take the response time from that group of 4 units to get to the scene for the first of its class, we are just under 9 minutes currently for the first unit of each class to arrive on scene.
And how might those response times impact our constituents?
Well, Madam Chair, unfortunately, obviously, the longer response time, as the response times increase, service delivery decreases in the sense of we have, as I've talked about, we have to arrive to emergency incident, whether it be a fire or medical call, in time to make a difference. Fires burn hotter and faster. We know that by science. We know that they're doubling in size every minute is what the science tells us. So there is a point where when we arrive, our impact will be limited. We know on medical calls, time is tissue. So we know on our critical nature calls, cardiac event, adrenaline event, a stroke type incident, CVA incident, obviously there is direct impact to us not arriving there. The longer it takes us, the outcome to the patient does diminish.
Okay, thank you. Oh, Councilman Wary.
Do you have a number of firefighters you could add before you have to have new stations? Again, I'm trying to think of sort of which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Like what makes sense? So, because you've got the list on, what was it, page 3? It's the fifth one, I guess the previous one with the map. You've got the list of things. Does it make sense to try to add firefighters before you build the new stations? And if so, how many firefighters? I think, hopefully that question makes sense. I know what I'm thinking, but did you guys understand it?
Madam Chair and Councilman Waring, yes, I understand. We understand. And actually, part of the presentation, a few more slides, we're talking about how we're going to be bringing on new full-time employees and how we can utilize those as well. Again, it's all part of that prioritization plan. So if we receive 30 new firefighters, we have a plan how we could put those firefighters to work to reduce the staffing impact, but also increase service delivery by reducing response times by putting units in service accordingly. Firefighters have to be put in the right location to have that impact, so it is based upon station size, station capacity. Is there options for a temporary type solution? Up in your district many years ago, we put Station 52 in service by the Sumitomo chip plant on a vacant lot with a trailer and another structure for the engine. So all those things are on the table. All those are on the prioritization plan. So as those positions become available, we can put those folks to work in the right location to have the most impact.
So thank you. So that, I guess I had a couple more if it's okay. Basically a 20-year plan. Is that plan then going to just take care of our needs 20 years from now? Or is it like, does a 20-year plan address needs 20 years in the future from then? I hope that's the case, right? I don't want to, because then we got to start all over again. Oh, we're short again. At what point do we actually catch up?
Madam Chair, Councilman Waring, members of the subcommittee, that's a great point. For us, it's about sustainability for the future.
Yeah.
And as Chief Walker mentioned, this plan is not for just us here today, but is for the future of the organization and how we build this out over time. And we understand that it takes a lot of support to put fire stations in the system, to put personnel into our system, right? We have human resource staff, support staff, we have logistics staff and training staff that also has impacts that we have to look at and consider as well as we introduce these new resources into our system here. So that is consideration for us, and that's why looking at this more of a short-term but long-term plan in both aspects of that is important for us, and we set this up for the future. And as Chief Walker mentioned, is looking at some creative ideas, just as he mentioned about Station 52 years back that we put up there just north of the 101 there as a temporary station. We'll look at opportunities to where we can plug in these resources should we get extra bodies in our system, and that's why it's important to have this prioritization plan ready to go, and we know where those needs are at and where we can address those needs and reduce those response times and provide better service to the community.
So the $342 million would hopefully address needs far into the future. That would be the goal, more than just the timeline that's laid out here.
That is correct, and this would be ever changing and set up for the future for the organization. Yes.
And you talked about putting them out in the open field. I think you've also staged out of hotels, right? I mean, I think you did that in my district a few years ago. So. Obviously, that's not ideal. Firefighters probably aren't thrilled about that either, rather than having a new station. But obviously, people are having heart attacks today. People are having whatever health issues, fires, et cetera. They're having those today. So how often do you utilize those kind of solutions? I mean, we just mentioned two examples. And at what's that saying about, don't let the perfect get in the way of the good? So I think you understand what I mean by that. Having someone out there today helps somebody today. It doesn't help. That person who's having a heart attack today is like, that's great that you're building a great fire station 5 years from now, but I need your help right now. So are you looking at those things like right this second and seeing what can be done? Like, I guess for me, if we got more firefighters and got them with the additional training and everything, how many people would it help if maybe the new folks were willing to stage out of a less than optimum location?
So Madam Chair and Councilman Waring, to your point is, yes, we are looking at all those options, part of that prioritization plan. Under Chief Duran's direction, we tasked Chief Christ to identify how can we put resources in service quickly. So is it in an existing station? Is it with a temporary solution? Is it with putting a shade structure in an existing station to put that unit? So we have that, and I can tell you it's a direct impact, positive impact to service delivery for every unit we put in service. And so we know and we have those conversations with the City Manager's Office and BNR The needs are here. Here's the priority of those needs. As funding becomes available for people, we have ways to put our members in service into stations. We have a very creative plan. As I said, the norm, we have to be non-traditional in our approach and our thinking, as it takes time to bring on fire stations. Additionally, you asked about, are we building for the future? We are building stations today and planning for today, like Station 62, not just for today, but for tomorrow. Our stations will be here, as we know, 50, 60 years. We want to make sure that in 20, 30, 40 years, as this community continues to grow, there's a space and capacity that those folks are not challenged with like we are today. There'll be room in those stations that we have on this list to add additional resources. So the biggest infrastructure cost of the station is being absorbed today, but it will benefit us 10, 15, 20 years down the road. Well, yes, we would need to add an extra new engine company and new staffing, but we'll have a place for those to go to have an impact as we grow.
And just one more. So my district and myself personally live right on the border of another city. And in just my case, you know, that we have 3 cities or towns like right along our border. So if I have a heart attack, they're sending the closest truck, whether it's a Scottsdale truck or a Phoenix truck. We had somebody saw somebody messing around what they thought was my house a couple nights ago at 1:30 in the morning, which was thrilling to hear. But it might not have been my house. But regardless, they thought it was. Scottsdale PD is who responded to it. You know, I assume they sent the closest car. And when we have speed issues, Scottsdale PD sits outside. Actually, they use my street because they patrol that section of the street. Do you guys ever, like, if Scottsdale is having the same issues we are with response times, is it possible to partner up? Instead of, like, I would hate to hear that they have a station on one side of Scottsdale Road and we built a station on the other side of Scottsdale Road where it doesn't really matter to the citizen. You're sending the closest truck. You see what I'm getting at? I mean, is there ways, like, I know Cave Creek has their own deal, but is there a way to go to them and say, hey, if you chip in $10 million or whatever, you know, some acceptable cost that could be negotiated, that would really defray our costs, but it would get firefighters up, stationed out of a nice new station right on the border, helping all of our residents a lot faster. Do you ever have conversations like that?
So, Madam Chair and Councilman Waring, the short answer is yes. We do. So we have the automatic gate system we are the gold standard in resources crossing jurisdictional boundaries in the country as far as you describe, closest, most appropriate unit, whether it be Scottsdale, Phoenix, Tempe, Glendale, we cross boundaries. So to extend that out to our planning and strategic planning of fire stations, it would make sense to do that. Just in the last, I would say, less than 2, maybe 3 weeks, Chief Duran, Chief Shannon from Scottsdale, and myself were involved in an email conversation. Scottsdale is looking to build 2 new fire stations in North Scottsdale area. They wanted to know how does that interact with our plan, and so we are planning accordingly. Again, all cities are in the same situation. Resources are certainly competitive to get. We want to make sure the dollars you give us, we use wisely. So we plan those locations based on what their plans are, where their stations are going to be, and so they do as well. In our Central Arizona Life Safety Council, which is all the fire chiefs of the automatic aid system. One of our subcommittees is a strategic planning committee where we're currently building a map of the entire region where we'll have all fire stations identified currently and plans for future fire stations. So we can look and make that best decision on where a new station needs to be. Perfect example, Station 62 in Southwest Phoenix. Originally, that station was programmed to be built at 99th Avenue, north of Lower Buckeye. That actually is closer to Avondale, closer to Tolleson. It really did not make sense for service delivery. We have duplication because Avondale is currently building 2 stations very close. We've moved that station to 93rd Avenue and Lower Buckeye. While it may not be a significant, may not seem significant distance-wise, it actually really changes the response on our units into Avondale, their units into Phoenix. So we are looking at exactly what you're talking about, working with all the region to where resources need to be.
That is a terrific answer, and I appreciate hearing it because that was important to me, so I'm glad that we got that out there. Can I ask, are any cities in the Valley or any cities of comparable size around the country, are they hitting the 5-minute mark? Because another thing is, you know, living right on the Scottsdale border, frankly, in 2 different directions, the way it carves out up there, you know, it would sort of be hard to explain to Phoenix residents if Scottsdale is meeting the 5-minute mark, but we're not. And I'm sure that'd be the case over on the Glendale side or what have you. So is anybody meeting the 5-minute mark, or is it aspirational for everybody? And I'm thinking particularly of our surrounding cities or any city of comparable size, Dallas, Philadelphia, something like that.
So, Madam Chair and Councilman Waring, to my knowledge, I'm not aware of any larger metropolitan city that has achieved the 5-minute response time standard on a 9th percentile basis that they can say definitively they do that. As I said in the beginning, though, it is the standard based objectively on outcomes of patients, outcomes on fire response, and we strongly believe it is the standard we should strive for. But we realize that bar is high. We're at the point, though, the further we go away from that standard, there is real consequences, as Madam Chair identified. So I'm not aware. I'm just not. There could be out there, but I'm not aware. Chief Duran might be aware. He has interactions with other departments as well, but I'm not aware of any that can say definitively on the 90th percentile they meet the 5-minute standard today.
Well, again, your answer on the last question, I really appreciated, but I would like sort of our surrounding cities then, since we're sharing resources, since you guys are working together, we should all kind of have comparable response times, I think. If we're not, it kind of doesn't seem fair somehow, particularly since we're putting in, I think, probably disproportionate amounts of resources because we're bigger. So if you could come back, it doesn't even have to be the next meeting, but at some point if you could come back to me, I'd be curious, like, how are we doing in that comparison? And then I'll sort of be able to guess or tell if what I'm reading makes a lot of sense, given how closely you're working together. So, thank you.
Councilwoman Ansari.
Thank you so much for the presentation so far. My question actually goes back to the conversation about the GO bond, and I'm just wondering if, assuming the bond is to pass in 2023, when we could expect those 4 new stations to be online, and whether you have a sense of how that would affect our response times, if it would maintain them, improve, or, if we'd continue to still be going in a downward trajectory. Thank you.
Madam Chair and Councilwoman Ansari, as far as the current 4 stations that are moving forward with the current bond program, generally it takes approximately 2.5 to 3 years when we get funding to a fire station opens. We generally allocate about a year for design, a year to buy, first year to buy land, find land, buy land, a year to design, and a year to build. Our plan is, with this 5-year bond program, to really be aggressive and to build in parallel these stations. We have land secured tentatively for 3 of those locations already, so with that, 1 year has already been taken care of. So realistically, if the voters approve it in 2023, we would see funding in 2024. We will hit the ground running. We're prepared, and we'll hit the ground running. I'd say realistically, you'd see stations out of that bond program opening in 2026 timeframe, probably the latter part of 2026 is the realistic timeframe to see a station open. In the meantime, we can work and see if it's possible to hire those positions ahead of time so we can train the firefighters. We can utilize that staff to help address our staffing needs and response times in the short term until those stations are open, and then those resources could move into those fire stations. Overall, adding 4 fire stations to a system as large as ours, do I believe we'll see a significant reduction in response times? The reality is probably not. Will it help us hold the line? Yes. The reality is these are going to go into very busy areas that have already 25% of their calls in these areas are being managed by other companies. So we'll have those secondary responses reduced by having a second unit in these areas. But overall, our system is so large, 4 units are probably not going to have a significant impact in reducing response times.
Everyone?
Councilman Garcia.
Thank you. So we're talking about 3 years from now. Is there a way for you to kind of have seen the last 3 years, and depending on our growth, and like Councilman Waring pointed out, it's not only Phoenix's growth but our surrounding area growth, how the call times increase? And I asked that question because with what you just said, we wouldn't have the new fire stations for 3 more years. So is the likelihood that in those 3 years, our times go up even higher?
Madam Chair, Councilman Garcia, we are working actually at trending just that to see. we have seen a significant growth in the number of calls for service over the last 2 years, significantly more than we had seen historically. Generally, we see 2 to 3% increase year over year on the number of calls for service. We saw in 2021, we saw about an 8%. This year, we're seeing right now trending at about 6 to 7%. So that number of calls is having an impact on service delivery response times. So much of the response time that really increased is due to this significant increase in calls for service over the last 2 years. If that stabilizes, I think you'll see our response times obviously stabilize as well. So it's going to be really based on that increasing number of calls. So we are trending that. We are watching that. We share, obviously, in our briefings with Mayor and Council monthly on those trends, so you're aware. And we certainly share that with the City Manager's Office as well. So I believe, looking at the numbers, we are plateauing a little bit over the last few months. We're certainly not seeing a decrease. So I do not see a trend that I'm aware of where we believe we'll see those response times significantly increase in the short term, but certainly are going to plateau at that level they're at today at a minimum.
And then you mentioned the times it takes to build new stations out, and you said there's a year design. We have some wonderful fire stations, and I'm sure we can come up with great designs. Is that design more based on the location, or is it that it just seems like a long time to design something and figure out how to get like the shovels on the ground. So can you explain that process a little bit more? And is there a way to cut that time?
Madam Chair and Councilman Garcia, each station oftentimes has to be designed basically per the property we were able to obtain. If we were fortunate to have a large 2 to 3 acre parcel that was a square, we could build a station and duplicate that. We just don't generally have the luxury. So each station is unique to its surroundings, to its property size. So that does require really starting almost over. Now, because we have some practice with Station 55 in Northwest Phoenix, that station was brought on very quickly. And so we do have a track record of being able to cut that time down. So as I said, in some of the projects we have moving in the bond currently, we have land secured. So that's already the first year we've secured land. So that's a year reduction. So we can start designing that station. We already have looked at those properties and have an idea. So yes, I believe we can design those stations faster than a year. We have to then get them in permits and get them into construction. Certainly, as we know, construction and all these timelines are being pressured right now across the city. So I believe there are opportunities to do it faster, but I would say realistically, it will take us from, if you said go, it would take us 2 years, probably a little longer than 2 years to get a station opened. That would probably be an aggressive timeline for us.
And then I was really intrigued with what you said, that we could start training folks beforehand to be ready for day one when those open up. And my question is, do we have space for other trucks now? If you were able to add trucks tomorrow, is there no space for them, or could we start adding them in places and then, move them as spaces become open?
Madam Chair and Councilman Garcia, I'll reference back. I hate to keep going back to the prioritization plan. It really is just that we've identified those stations that do have space. The reality is many of our stations, because they are very old, do not have space to add new apparatus. But we are looking at, is there a way to do a temporary facility on a vacant piece of property? Is there a way to find real estate in existing structure that could be used temporarily to make a fire station? Councilman Waring mentioned the hotel concept we've done before. So we're looking at those options. But part of that prioritization plan is on that priority of needs. What can we do to address that need today? How can we be creative with our solution to staff a fire truck, acquire a fire apparatus of some type, and put it in service in that vicinity? So there are creative options that we have on the table that are part of that prioritization plan. So if, in fact, as you'll see when we get to the end of the slide, we'll be asking for some of the staffing to be hired sooner than Station 62. If we can hire that staff earlier than those stations, we can train them and we can utilize that staff on an apparatus to help address staffing challenges and response time, service delivery until the station is open. So we have a plan for that. Chief Duran has given clear direction that he wants us to be ready if and when positions, whether it be 5 positions or 50 positions, be ready to utilize that staff in a way that can best benefit the community.
And so I think there's no room to add a truck if we had the money tomorrow to any station?
Madam Chair and Councilman Garcia, there are places we could add a truck. There are places that we can put a unit in service. The reality is most of the high pressure, high priority areas like Station 7 Sunny Slope, that station is over 50 years old. There is no room there. Potentially we could move a unit. So we do have creative solutions. If we can get funding for positions or get positions into the current fiscal year, next fiscal year, we have ways to get them in those stations. We do have options. I don't want you to think we do not have options. We have some very creative solutions to how we can do that.
Okay. And then my last question is to the 20-year plan. That seems like it's dependent that we continue to do the 5-year bonds. My hesitation with it, and I think I spoke about it in this subcommittee and also in the general council meeting, is that we don't know where we're going to be at 5 years. Literally, council members, but also where the economy is going to be at. If we were to have a greater appropriation during this bond, would that be able to be put to use, and would we be able to add other stations? I understand there's also the construction industry and all that and prices, but if we were able to raise the funds in the bond program, would we be able to add more stations sooner?
Madam Chair and Councilman Garcia, as Assistant City Manager Bays has expressed to the bond committees, the time it takes to build stations, as you said, the resources available, the other city departments we're dependent upon to help do that. Building 5 to 6 stations, 7 stations in a 4 or 5 year window would be a significant challenge. I would always hate to say we can't, but I can tell you it would be a challenge, and we would have to work very hard. A lot of things would have to align to be able to build 5, 6, 7 stations in a 5 year window.
Okay, but could we do the stations that we're planning to? And again, I disagree. I think if we set our minds to, we have the money, I think we could figure it out. But would we then have the option to use those funds for some of the temporary solutions, or some of the other, even the be able to work with other cities, or some of these locations you spoke of? Would it make it easier to make some of those things happen?
So, Madam Chair and Councilman Garcia, yes, as funding becomes available, we have plans to use that funding. I can tell you that. So between our plan as far as our fire station forecast, or building fire stations, between the prioritization plan and the short-term really gap solutions we've created, we have a very comprehensive plan of how to put units in service creatively and permanently with funding as it becomes available, whether that became available through the bond program or through other sources of funding.
Thank you, Chief.
Moving on, I think we addressed the future program, and like I was saying, is while we all would like to increase capacity at a higher rate, it takes time to build those stations, hire and train firefighters, and to purchase apparatus. And this does provide at least a sustainable model for us to follow. Next, we want to talk a little bit about innovation. Councilman Waring asked specifically about how we're using technology or innovation to address this issue. So the Phoenix Fire Department has a long history as a leader. As a leader, we will continue to seek innovative solutions, both in our service delivery model and in technology solutions. So examples of some of the things we've done in the past. We've created the Medical Response Vehicle Program. So this is a lighter duty vehicle that we staff with firefighters that helps to supplement those very busy engine companies. These units are designed to fill that gap on those EMS, critical EMS types calls. So they're not designed, they don't have water, hose, those types of things, but they fill that gap. So we are adapting our deployment model and our structure to meet today's needs, being innovative in that. We are bringing on the Community Assistance Program, a really significant expansion after support by Mayor and Council, as everyone knows. When we see that program fully realized with staff and all the units in service, we do believe that this program will fill that gap between the traditional fire and police response, really providing a more appropriate service to the members that fall within that gap. So we're excited about the impact that's going to have. Our telehealth program, we've talked about that. This is our 911 diversion program. We actually minimize the need to send a fire truck to a patient and only to get them connected with a doctor. We're going to be able to do that within minutes instead of hours. We're looking at an integrated community health program. This really can include a lot of different ideas and options that Chief Duran has seen and myself across the country. One specific area is looking at potentially a 2-person teams that could focus on our high-impact users. Again, reducing the need to send fire trucks and actually getting our residents connected to the correct resources for them. And then on the technology side, we brought on our electronic patient care reporting system about 1.5 years ago. This is a more effective and efficient way to capture patient care, also allowing our firefighters to clear the scene more quickly because it's a faster process for them. We're a leader in the in the country as far as dispatching in our CAD. So one of the areas we do that is our synthesized voice dispatching. For several years we've had this. So when a call taker is talking to a 911 caller and realizes this is a critical call, they can push a button, dispatch that fire apparatus, providing that fire unit, that station, that unit with where to go, what the call is, while that call taker is still collecting information from the caller that can then be shared. This is saving 30 to 60 seconds on our dispatch time by having this system in place. And then lastly, we have been a leader in really GIS dispatching of fire apparatus through our automatic vehicle locator program, also the Routeware application. So there's a comprehensive street network that identifies speed limits, turns, and allows us to select the closest, most appropriate resource or fire apparatus by AVL, by GPS, and then route that truck or dispatch that truck to the incident. Again, faster response to the call. So these are just some of the areas that we've been using technology and also service delivery model changes to be innovative in how we serve our community. Our goal, again, is always to ensure that we are effective and efficient with all that you've given to us. And then next, we wanted to talk a little bit about our PFD response model. So Councilman Waring specifically asked about why we send a fire truck to EMS incidents. So this is a good question and one we've certainly been asked before. The reality is we have a very good answer to this. So first, the Phoenix Fire Department model is what's known as an all-hazards fire department. What this means is we respond to and manage really everything outside of the law enforcement-related emergency incidents generally. Fires, medical incidents, car collisions, hazmat incidents, technical rescue incidents, airport rescue, firefighting, etc., and a variety of other needs that our community may experience. In a modern city where fire emergencies are not the majority of incidents or calls for service, this model is extremely effective as you are utilizing existing resources that are located throughout the city to meet other needs. Phoenix firefighters are well trained in multiple disciplines that include firefighting, EMS, extrication, hazmat, technical rescue, and ARF. We are the ultimate multitasker. Our crews can be dispatched to a drowning incident, and then from there to a car collision, and then to a house fire, and then to someone in cardiac arrest, all before returning to the fire station. While in a newer modern city, fires may not be the majority of what a fire department responds to, we still have a significant number of incidents that require 4 trained firefighters to be able to arrive quickly in a fire apparatus with the ability to manage that incident. Annually, we respond to thousands of calls for service that require a fire apparatus and firefighters trained to respond to that incident. Fires, hazmat incidents, car collisions, etc. Because this need exists, we must have a network of fire stations strategically located throughout our 520 square miles to ensure we can arrive quick enough with the necessary tools and trained people to have an impact. But because we have these resources already strategically located throughout the city, it is more effective to utilize the existing resources to meet other needs. If we did not utilize existing firefighters and apparatus, we would actually need to duplicate our resources, which would be significantly more costly. And then it is a standard of care. So several non-fire related sources have identified that a 4-person response force is needed and significantly more effective. One being the American Heart Association. They've identified that a 4-person response team is necessary to effectively manage a critical medical event, a cardiac event, a drowning, those types of incidents. And just as a point of note, in a hospital, it's actually 7. And you might see on TV where 7 people are around a patient, all doing specific tasks. Those need to be happening in parallel and not in sequentially. This is how we give the best chance of survival for a patient. But we are also open to utilizing supplemental resources that we talked a lot about already today. We're open to alternative response units, the MRV, and we will continue to seek alternative types of resources where they can add value and incorporate them into our system. So based on these factors, we do believe that the all-hazards model is the appropriate model as the foundation for the city of Phoenix. So in closing, what we are doing. So we are building Fire Station 62 at 93rd Avenue Lower Buckeye in the southwest portion of the valley. This was done outside of the bond program. We are expanding the CAP program, the Community Assistance Program, as we've talked about. Again, believe there will be real impact to our community from that program. We are bringing the telehealth program online just in a matter of a few weeks. We've added new positions in this fiscal year. We were fortunate enough to add positions for Fire Station 72. This is in the Councilman Waring's district in Northeast Phoenix, where this is 15 new positions and a new fire apparatus that will be assigned to Station 72. We were able to bring on 4 new firefighter rover positions. This will help with our staffing issues and challenges. And we were recently awarded the SAFER, the Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response grant for 2021 with 32 new positions. These positions are fully funded by the grant for 3 years. We've also increased our training capacity. I've talked about programming in an additional academy class, also receiving funding for a new dedicated apparatus for the training facility. And then finally, the dispatch nature code review. This is looking at those dispatch nature codes and making sure how we're dispatching, what units we're sending makes sense in today's environment. So finally, what we are requesting. We are requesting funding for the Fire Station 62 positions. This is talking about bringing those positions on early. We're requesting funding in our 23-24 budget to fund 24 positions that will be utilized for Station 62 when it opens in mid-2024. By bringing these positions on early, we can train these firefighters, we can utilize these firefighters in supplemental resources to support all the things we've talked about already today. We're asking for funding for new Rescue 19, rescues and ambulance in our system, 7 new positions that will be assigned to Sky Harbor. Sky Harbor's call volume or activity levels are up pre-COVID. We need a dedicated unit in the airport to meet the needs of the airport. And then finally, we're requesting funding be added to the 23-24 budget for the 2019 SAFER positions. So there's 27 positions funded out of the 2019 grant. These positions the grant funding will expire in early 2024. Historically, we would have to absorb those positions back once that funding expired. We're asking for funding to be added to our budget so these positions can then be moved to the general fund, funded, and not cause us to have to reduce our authorized count in the fire department's staffing levels. So these are the items that we're asking for of the subcommittee today. Total, between this fiscal year and those positions, if you choose to move forward with those requests, that would be an increase of 109 new positions in the fire department in really less than 2-year time frame, over 2 fiscal years, but in less than 2 years time frame to bring them online. So with that does conclude the presentation. We're happy to answer any other questions you might have for us.
Councilman Waring.
So Chief, how much is that? What you just laid out?
The Madam Chair and Councilman Waring, the cost for those positions we're asking for?
Yeah.
You know what? I apologize. I do not have the breakdown of the cost of those positions. I apologize.
I would just say as a follow-up, thank you we asked a lot of questions at the last meeting. I asked some more this one, but the last meeting, I think you answered them all. I really do appreciate the time you obviously spent on this, and it was extremely helpful to me. So thank you.
Could you go back to the slide with the map? On that map, there are 4 projected new fire stations north of the 101 and in Councilman Waring and mine's district. And given the projected growth north of the 101, will that be a sufficient amount of resources for that area over the next 10 to 20 years?
So Madam Chair, this map, as I said, was created in 2020. We continually update it as we get more information on growth. We know the Biscuit Flats area. I'm sure you're very familiar. We know that actually is, my understanding, going to be bigger than the Anthem area. So as we get a sense of what that's going to look like, this map will be updated. The reality is, at full build-out, no, we will probably need more stations north of that. We want to be logical in what we show on the map and we plan for best as we get more information. So we will continue to update that and based on information.
So this map is a living, breathing document based on how we see the growth coming?
Madam Chair, yes, it is. The city is, as you know, is one of the fastest growing cities in the country, and so because of that, it really almost happens real time. But that's that collaboration with planning and development and economic development to really early know what development's happening and have those conversations so we can keep this updated.
So it looks like there's a date in the bottom corner of 2019. So that's the last time this map was updated. Is that correct?
I apologize. No, it has been updated since then. That date is incorrect.
Okay. So when was it updated most recently?
Approximately 6 months ago, we did a review on it to make some adjustments based on the information we had. Also, the GEO bond program has been, I'd say, dynamic in what stations are moving forward, so we're trying to adjust for that as well and think about future bond programs.
Okay. And then I just need some clarification on the positions you asked for and when they would, what budget they would impact. So the request for Fire Station 62 positions, the 24, that would be added to this year's budget?
Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, we are, all these positions we are requesting for Station 62, the 24 positions, the 7 positions for Rescue 19, and the really funding for the 27 safer position would be in the 23-24 budget.
So next year's budget?
Yes.
Okay.
Although, for clarification, Madam Chair, we would be adding them mid-year this year so that we can be prepared to have them ready to go going into the 23-24 budget year. Otherwise, we would be waiting for 23-24 budget to be approved, and then there's a time frame that we'd have to go through to get those positions online and get folks hired. So this is to expedite that process and to add them into the 23-24 budget early. So the recommendation would be to take this matter to the full council for approval in December.
Okay, and so then I need someone to help me with my math, because when I add up the number of positions you have in parentheses on there, that does not come to 109 positions.
So the 109 positions is for the 58 positions that you see on the screen here, plus the additional positions that Chief Walker outlined on the previous slide that are already that have already been approved into the budget. So the positions.
So the
for
previous
Station
slide ones
72
have already been approved.
Correct.
It's the 58 additional ones that you're asking for us to move forward to the council, and so, Lori, can you give us some idea of the budget impact for those, please?
So each position is approximately $153,000. So if you multiply that by 58, you get $8.85 million. So that's an approximation. We'd have to verify and make sure we have everything accurate with budget and research, but that's an approximation of the cost for the 58 positions.
And so do we have the capacity within our budget for that additional 8.85 roughly?
So this would be built into the 23-24 budget, so it would be added to the fire department budget for 23-24.
Okay, but didn't you just say you wanted to add some of those positions this year so that they would be ready to go?
Yeah, so let me see how I can best explain this. Essentially, it's an early approval of a 23-24 budget item is what we'd be asking the council to do.
So not an impact to this year's budget then?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Any, Councilman Waring?
I assume, so basically we'd have them set up, people could apply, and then they'd be able to start potentially July 1st. That may be overly optimistic, but that's what you're saying, right?
That's correct. That would be the intention, is to move forward as quickly as possible so that we could have those positions filled.
Perfect.
Wonderful. Thank you for that clarification. All right, with that, I would accept a motion.
Move to approve.
Do we have a second? I'll move to second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you both for being with us.
Thank you.
Our next item is going to be the Super Bowl update, and for this item we have Director John Chan, Commander Brian Lee, and Deputy Chief Justin Alexander. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. This morning we're here to provide an update on the planning efforts for Super Bowl 57. In just 95 days, Arizona will be hosting the Super Bowl. This will be the 4th time that the game will be held in Arizona, and while the game will be held at State Farm Stadium in Glendale on February 12th, many of the fan-related events will be held in the city of Phoenix and the surrounding communities. And just on top of that, the Waste Management Phoenix Open will be occurring at the same time at the TPC in Scottsdale. That event has historically drawn about 700,000 people, so it's going to be a very busy time, not only in the city of Phoenix, but in the entire region. So when we last hosted the Super Bowl 49 in 2015, the game generated an economic impact of more than $720 million for the region, and this was driven by visitors to Arizona who filled Phoenix hotel rooms to near capacity. Phoenix Sky Harbor, Valley Metro Rail, and the Phoenix Convention Center all saw record-breaking numbers for passengers and attendees. And in addition, 1 million people attended events in downtown Phoenix for events leading up to the Super Bowl in 2015. So over the years, the city of Phoenix has established a high standard and a proven track record for hosting major events. For the staff, the planning process began back in last December, and we work very closely with our partners at the NFL and the Arizona Super Bowl Host Committee. As you can see on this slide, we have an internal steering committee that includes staff representatives from more than 20 city departments, and it covers all aspects of the planning process. We are focused on delivering seamless planning and coordination to ensure a safe, secure, and memorable experience for attendees. So today we're here to provide an update on the public safety portion of the city's planning effort, and at this time I'll turn it over to Commander Lee.
Thank you, Director Chan. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. I'd like to give just a brief overview of the planning structure that's gone on behind this whole effort in order to ensure that all the personnel and the appropriate resources that have been identified not only to meet the events that are taking place within the city of Phoenix, but also as we prepare to provide support across the entire region. This slide depicts the National Incident Management System, or the NIMS model that we utilize for unified command for all planning here in the city of Phoenix. The Homeland Defense Bureau, in partnership with both police and fire, are participating agencies in this. And this is just a brief organizational chart to show how each of those sections are broken out in order to account for all of the operational, logistical, planning, finance, and intelligence components that make up a completed operations plan. This next slide is really what kind of sets the city of Phoenix and the state of Arizona apart. This is the organizational structure that we utilize for Multi-Agency Coordination Center, commonly referred to as the MAC. This is the gold standard that has been nationally recognized by the NFL and others that the city of Phoenix has used repeatedly for not only the last Super Bowl, but for several other large major events here in the Valley. What this does is, although it does not have a command and control element to it, it actually is a process that we use to be able to solicit participation voluntarily from all of the other regional supporting public safety agencies, where they basically pledge their commitment of in-kind resources to support both personnel and physical resources to make sure that we meet the operational demands across the entire region. All of the blue boxes that you see there are participating agencies that are assisting with providing those resources and personnel, which are broken out into what we call resource working groups. This is a brief, just a schedule of the meetings that we've had that have started taking place since March of this year. It started off with an executive committee meeting, and this was the meeting in which all of the agency chiefs and administrators were brought together to give them an overview of the planning structure that would be utilized. During that time, they all committed their agencies to participate, and then we began the actual planning structure, starting with the Executive Advisory Committee that meets the first Wednesday of every month. This advisory committee addresses some of the policy level issues that may come up during the planning cycle. The core planning group is the group responsible for all of the coordination and the planning of the resource work groups. They meet the second Wednesday of every month. And then the resource working groups are really where the rubber meets the road for us. They meet the third Wednesday of the month, and they are responsible for identifying, coordinating, and scheduling all of the regional assets, needs, and personnel requirements for the events themselves. This slide depicts the resource working groups that were mentioned earlier. During the 2015 Super Bowl, we had 24 resource working groups. As we have built out this model for this year, we've actually increased by 2. We've added 2 additional resource working groups that include the unmanned aircraft system and the technology GIS system for mapping and regional needs. Each one of these resource work groups have a chair and a co-chair assigned to them, and they're responsible for not only identifying just the resources that will be needed in order to staff the operations plans for Phoenix events, but also ensuring that there's equitable distribution and participation by the other outside agencies in providing resources that provide a large enough pool to be able to meet all of the demands across the entire region. There's a lot going on with this slide, but really this slide shows the information in the intelligence collection model that is used in order for us to be able to capture any information that is reported into the system. What's important for us here is that we receive information in a variety of ways at both the local, state, and the federal level. This collection model ensures that we have participation at all levels of government to be able to triage that information that comes in, make sure that it gets assigned to the appropriate agency responsible for immediate follow-up, and then most importantly on the back end, it ensures that it is documented and that there's a final disposition that is included in a daily situational report so that we can brief out leadership as to the activities that we have identified. One of the important things for us here, too, is that this also helps us to coordinate our participation in some of the regional campaigns to include our See Something, Say Something, reporting of suspicious activity, and it also provides a coordination model for us to use for human trafficking, for people that want to call in and report information. We have a one-stop shop to be able to do that so that all that information is then shared across the agencies. This just illustrates the interconnectedness, if you will, of the entire intelligence and information sharing community. Because this is a level 1 special event assessment rating, or a SEER level as we refer to it as, the FBI by definition has the primary responsibility for leading the intelligence and information sharing model. That's why you see them at the top. The Multi-Agency Coordination Center, as well as the ACTIC, the Arizona Counterterrorism and actually Information Center. That is the statewide fusion center that is directly connected. And really the purpose here, all the small agency circles you see at the bottom, those are all the geographic incident management teams that each one of these valley agencies that will be hosting events, they will be standing up their own incident management team to address the issues in their particular jurisdiction. The important takeaway for this here is that, again, the FBI has primary federal responsibility for that SEER 1 event. And it does show two-way communication and connectedness at all levels of government. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to my fire department counterpart, Deputy Chief Justin Alexander.
Thank you, Commander Lee. Madam Chair and council members, this slide here, we're going to talk about the events themselves. The Public Safety IMT will be matching the organization described by Commander Lee to the events occurring in our city's footprint to make public safety, or to maximize public safety and security to the events and well-being of residents and visitors of our city. We'll be utilizing city and council-supported resources, beginning with the facilities such as the Emergency Operations Center and the Tactical Operations Center, our downtown camera projects, the drone projects, the council-approved grant funding resources that come from the Urban Area Security Initiative and the State Homeland Security Grant Program. Our plans, staffing, and resources will be integrated with those of all local, county, tribal, state, and federal partners. Additionally, we will be working with NFL Security, local hospitals, and other private partners, as well as all city departments. So in this slide, we'll be going over the particular events that are happening within our footprint. So we have the Super Bowl experience presented by Lowe's at the Phoenix Convention Center, February 4th through 5th. There will be a gap or a lull. And then we'll be resuming again the 9th through 11th. We're working directly with the NFL, the host committee, the Convention Center, and Super Bowl Steering Committee to build public safety plans that will take into account our population, complexity, attendance, and transportation issues, and duration of the events, which is especially important, as we saw in the last presentation, as you know, our public safety resources are stretched with their staffing. So all of our planning, this region-wide support piece that we just talked about with sharing of communications and resources is especially important to help mitigate those shortages while we ensure the safety of these large-scale events. The NFL Honors at Symphony Hall will happen February 9th. Super Bowl experience presented by Lowe's at Hance Park will be occurring February 8th through 12th. This will be a large-scale open-air event with concerts and other activations, food trucks, and such. And then something new that they're doing this year for us is a official Super Bowl watch party, which will happen on Super Bowl Sunday at the Margaret T. Hance Park, also on February 12th. We've been meeting regularly with the NFL host committee and their event planners to complete our plans. We're in a great place right now. Most of the organization that Commander Lee had described have gotten their plans in an early stage, and we've passed those to the resource working groups. They are going through those and making sure that we are able to have all the resources and staffing that we need for those. Additionally, open air events present additional safety and security concerns. We're going to be leveraging our pre-existing grant-funded and council-approved assets and resources to mitigate some of those challenges. Those would include using our MMRS, which is the Mass Medical Response System, BaseX, which is a resource system where we can bring resources forward to mitigate large-scale or mass casualty events. And then we're working with other partners on projects such as KIMPAC, which is a forward placement of chemical countermeasure medicines and other equipment that can be utilized should there be some sort of a chemical attack. Additional events, we'll be hosting Super Bowl opening night at the Footprint Center February 6th. And then on February 9th through 11th, we've got Bud Light Super Bowl Music Fest at the Footprint Center. Here we have a list of those events that are official Super Bowl sanctioned or host committee sanctioned events. Some of them we've already talked about: the Super Bowl experience presented by Lowe's, the NFL Media Center, the Super Bowl opening night presented by Fast Twitch, Bud Light Super Bowl Music Fest at the Footprint Center, the NFL Honors presented by Invisalign, Taste of the NFL, Host Committee NFL Experience, official Super Bowl Watch Party, and there is one on here, the non-NFL concert at Chase Field. We learned last night that that is no longer on there, so we will remove that from our event list. This is a small sample, although these are large, important events, and these will be the focus of our planning. There are dozens and dozens of events that will be happening region-wide throughout this time period that we're also monitoring, and we will also have to take into account because they will impact our response system. Additionally, our planning for this event, our preparedness, includes exercises and tabletop. We've already had a couple of them. On September 13th, we had a TSA-hosted Valley Metro Regional Public Transit Authority exercise with regional partners involved in transit, like Valley Metro and our city streets and transportation partners. On November 1st, we had a DHS-hosted exercise titled Assessing and Optimizing Local Chemical Defense Systems, or Medical Countermeasure Coordination. This was an exercise that brought together emergency management, hospital partners, and Department of Homeland Security to discuss mitigation efforts connected to biological and chemical attacks. Additionally, coming up, we have a large tabletop exercise on December 7th, the NFL hosted Intelligence and Cybersecurity Summit. We have on December 8th, the FBI hosted Super Bowl 57 Public Safety Security Tabletop Exercise. On January 5th, the CISA hosted Communications Tabletop Exercise. January 12th, we will be having a citywide exercise. So Phoenix Homeland Defense Bureau hosted Super Bowl 57 Phoenix Events tabletop exercise. And then the week of January 23rd, it was expressed to us by the NFL they'd like to have a follow-up tabletop exercise to discuss security as well. The purpose of these exercises is to test our capabilities and relationships through plan coordination, communication, and resource sharing, to create new partnerships, to increase Super Bowl response capacity, and to build relationships and systems that will serve us beyond the Super Bowl. Our go-live dates for the Regional Public Safety Multi-Agency Coordination Center, which will be taking place at the Emergency Operations Center at the Phoenix Fire Department Training Facility, will begin Monday, January 30th through Monday, February 13th, 2022. And then our Public Safety Incident Management Team will be operating at the Tactical Operations Center, which will be the Phoenix Fire Department Administration Building. And we will operate Thursday, February 2nd through Monday, February 13th. Oh, sorry about that. So those are those go-live dates. And then this slide merely illustrates the strategic partners that we're working with, and it actually dips onto the next one, so I'll go ahead and advance there. But as you can see, we're working with strategic partners in public safety from the local, county, tribal, state, and federal levels, as well as private partners and city partners and other departments to make this a successful event. And we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions, Councilman Garcia?
No, none from me. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for the presentation. We do appreciate all the hard work that is going into planning for this event to make it an incredible and extraordinary experience for all of our visitors and residents. So thank you for being with us, gentlemen. All right, we will now move to the Day Watch Commander Pilot Update. For that, we have Assistant Chief Derek Elmore. Good morning, sir. Thank you for being with us.
Good morning, Madam Chair and council members. Today I'll be talking about the Day Watch Commander Pilot Program that started a couple of months ago. The overall view of the program of the Day Shift Watch Commander is to address a few of the concerns that we have. Part of that concern is the changing demands of police services across the city, the variations in daily police staffing due to a multitude of factors, sick, injured, training. There's a variety of reasons why people call off, and so this helps to address some of those issues. Also, thirdly, the unequal variations of the distribution of the patrol calls for service based on vacancies, post-rebid attrition, and call volumes and violent crime types. The fourth incidental benefit to this is the handling of major incidents during a shift which allows the precinct commanders more time to focus on the day-to-day operations of the precinct as opposed to worrying about the incident as it goes on. One of the main things that the Day Shift Watch Commander Pilot Program does is it redeployment of resources during critical times and critical incidents of the day. The idea is to equalize the customer service provided to all the community members throughout the city. At any given time, one part of the city may naturally be busier than another part of the city, and it varies from day to day what that is. Officers are moved at the watch commander's discretion, so sometimes just because one place is busier than another doesn't mean a watch commander is going to necessarily move it, depending on a variety of other factors that they take into consideration, potential calls and other things that they do. They don't want to leave one area naked while they are deploying resources to another area. Usually the movement is done for approximately 30 minutes to 2 hours at the most to stabilize the high call volume area, and then those resources are moved back to their home precinct. Officers are temporarily moved from the slower area to assist with reducing the time that citizens are waiting for police services. So to help out, it's not equitable to have someone waiting for minutes, sometimes hours, when there's places in the city that are not as busy and there are available police officers for that.
Councilman Waring.
So it's the moving of officers that caused me some concern. I don't think we've discussed it with you, but we've discussed it at this committee. You know, like Black Mountain Precinct covers a huge area.
Yes.
You know, there's not that many officers covering a big geographic area. Even if I take your point, there's still crime, but there's not as much crime as there are other parts of the city, and it's not as dense. But that doesn't take out travel time. So if you move officers from Black Mountain to another precinct, almost by definition, given the geography, if something happens in Black Mountain Precinct and they got to hustle back up to home, it's going to take forever, particularly if it's not in the middle of the night when there's not as much traffic. But even if it is then, there's only so fast you can drive. So that's not necessarily fair. I understand what is trying to be accomplished here, but it's also not fair to the citizens who wind up having to make a call, you know, they hadn't in the past had to make. And all of a sudden they're like, where are the officers?
Right. So the ideal behind the program is not to move them for long periods of time, but also not to move them far. So the idea is to bump them, like if we're taking units from 200 and moving them, normally speaking, we would move them to 900, an adjacent precinct, which would cut down some of that reduced time if a big scene happens and they need more officers back. We also want to make sure that we don't leave 200 bare so that they don't have the ability to respond to those calls for service when they happen. Anthem is one of the places that we won't move resources from because of that thing that you're just talking about, the drive time that it takes to get up there and to have a backup. So a two-man unit's always available and always up there, and then resources are coming from that to help them. So those things are taken into consideration when we're looking at that.
I'm worried we're leaving large swaths of North Phoenix relatively undefended. And frankly, at some point, criminals might pick up on this and act accordingly. That's certainly a concern of mine. I don't know how, like I know what you're saying about you're going to move them right across the street, essentially, but I sort of doubt that you would move people from the southern part of Black Mountain into Desert Horizon. Probably because those are somewhat equivalent things, crime statistic-wise, I would imagine, North Desert Horizon and South Black Mountain. So I'm not sure what the need would be to move them. Maybe you can respond to that. But I would think you'd be moving them more west. And I just, to get back to where they would need to be, I know that it's nearby. On paper, maybe it's nearby, but physically it's not that nearby. Or am I just misreading?
Well, as you know, as you've pointed out, in Black Mountain, there's nothing that's nearby.
Right.
So,
yeah, I was trying to define nearby, and I couldn't do it in relation to Black Mountain.
As close as geographically possible, right? So, having worked in Black Mountain Precinct for a while, I realized that responding to a hot call can take 20 to 30 minutes just in drive time, depending on where you're coming from and where you have to go. So that is something that is taken into consideration, which is why we are very judicious about how we move those resources. Having resources in Black Mountain that can be available sometimes because of the lack of call volume is why we have decided to do it as a day watch commander, someone that can move them and then move them back rapidly when needs to be, as opposed to just moving resources to the busier parts of the city. So it's not always Black Mountain that pays the price, and I have a couple examples in here, and I'll give you the most common example, which is in here, which comes up later in the PowerPoint, which is a move from Black Mountain, but it moves from Black Mountain to 900 to 800 to help out in that way.
And I also know what you're saying, this is short. It's not like they're being moved permanently or even for a full day. I'm envisioning, you move them, so they've been moved for an hour, and then there's a school shooting or something, and now they're far away. If it happens to hit the wrong window, it could lead to a terrible tragedy or exacerbate an already in progress tragedy. I mean, there's no way to predict something like that.
Correct, and that would be an all-call citywide anyway, so
Right.
you would get responses from everywhere.
But just
coming
because
to
of the
help.
nature of Black Mountain, it's going to take all of those people a while to get there.
But you're going to have the ones that are already in that area available to respond to that right away.
But what if you've moved them? Maybe I'm misunderstanding.
Well, we're not moving all the resources, so it's not like we take all the resources from 200 and move them over to 9. It is usually 1 or 2 units at the most that are bumped over and then are moved down. So it's not like we're depleting a whole squad to move over and address the issue.
So I think like the 21 area, that's the area that goes up to New River, right?
Correct.
I think I'm, okay. So how many cars, how many physical bodies would be in that area at a given point in time during the day?
It would depend on the day and the shift. I don't have those exact numbers because it all depends. It changes on a day-to-day basis.
But so there'd be multiple cars out. That's still a big area, so you could have a bunch of cars out, and they still wouldn't necessarily be nearby a given location, depending on where the call came in. But
Correct.
I'm
So
just wondering, how many do you have that if you wanted to move 2 over west or something, do you really have 2 to spare, given the geographic size?
So as Councilman Waring, Councilwoman, I'm sorry, she's not here anymore. Councilwoman O'Brien. Yeah, so it all depends on the day and the shift. So there's usually that's why it's at the watch commander's discretion. So if there's if moving units out of 200 was going to deplete it to the point where they weren't going to be able to defend itself, the watch commander wouldn't make that move. It would make a move doing something with another precinct that maybe wasn't as busy.
Well, I appreciate you hearing me out. I just want to register. I have concerns, given what I've heard about this. We really need to get you more officers. That's actually the solution to this problem.
Correct.
It's not like fire where we already have the people now, and then we're trying to add people. We're just trying to fill the spots that we already budgeted for, and that's proven difficult, obviously. It makes me very uneasy. It's no reflection on your work. I understand what the goal is. I understand the charge that you've been tasked with. And I understand, and I've talked to people at the gym, because this front doors, I mean, this comes up. I don't see as many squad cars, and I explain, it's a lower crime area. That's not to say that there's not crime. There's not to say that there's not important things going on. That's not to say that, we should respond slower to your call rather than somewhere else in the city. But I get that some of the more extreme or dangerous crimes are happening by and large elsewhere, and you're trying to move the resources, to nearby that. But it's tough going to explain that to people who live up there. I'm one of those people. And unbeknownst to me, we had a call for service at my house the other night. I didn't know about it till the next morning. Scottsdale PD actually caught the call, but I didn't know that. It is, for all of us up in North Phoenix, I think it's concerning. There's no doubt about it. And I hope you can understand my concerns
Absolutely.
and take it in the spirit in which it's intended.
Absolutely, I understand that because I live in North Phoenix myself, so I definitely understand that and can relate to that. Ideally, what we would really like is to have enough officers that we can leave everyone in their beats, and that based off the model that we have now, that's not possible given the numbers that we have. So we have to do something as a stopgap to bridge that gap until we can get to the point where we can
I understand it's a crisis.
redeploy, have a different redeployment model, or have enough officers so that we can leave them where they are. Because that's ideally what we want. We want community-based policing. We want the officers to know the people in their neighborhood. We want them to know the businesses in their neighborhood. We want them to have that relationship.
Madam Chair, if you don't mind, just one more. I've had these numbers in my head, but now it's been a few months and I've forgotten, and also I'm sure the situation has changed. How many is Black Mountain supposed to have versus how many do they actually have?
Let me see if I have that number with me. I don't have how many they're supposed to have on me right now. The number that they have currently right now is 124.
I think the last number I heard was 138. It just seems like, as I wind up explaining to people, it's drip, drip, drip. It's not, they're moving everybody out all at once, but it's a few, it seems like every few months. Every time I hear that number, it seems like it gets smaller.
That's correct.
And that's just discouraging from my perspective. But again, I also understand the dilemma that the department faces. So, okay, Okay, I know I've asked a lot of questions today, so I'm sorry about that, Madam Chair. So,
Okay, please continue, sir.
move on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councilman Waring. Again, as we talked about, the watch commander's job is to try to move people within adjacent precincts. Occasionally it has happened that they haven't done that and they've moved them over wider periods of time. I've discouraged that and asked them to make sure that that's what's happening. Here we are talking about the call volume that we have for the different precincts. Black Mountain precinct's at 11%. As you can see, the discrepancy comes in when you look at Maryville Estrella, which has over 95,000 calls for service. That's just year to date. And so it's not always that we don't have enough officers. Sometimes we just don't have enough officers in the right spot, and that's the ideal behind the watch commander.
So all these precincts, it's not like council districts where at least at the start of redistricting, they're all supposed to be about this pretty much exactly the same size. These do not all, Black Mountain doesn't have the same number of people living in it that Cactus Park does, correct?
That's correct, sir.
So, I mean, how much difference is there? Because it's surprising when you look at this, wow, Black Mountain and has more than Central City. But I assume way more people live in Black Mountain than Central City. I think.
So Central City Precinct is basically one squad area.
Yeah.
It is not a full precinct.
Yeah.
It is the equivalent to one squad area.
Yeah.
And that's
and
why
only about 3% of the city's population lives downtown, whereas in Black Mountain, it's probably, 10, 12% or something. So,
correct.
Okay, so that explains the difference. For anybody watching at home, I did want to explain that. It's not like it's apples to apples. These aren't all equivalent.
No, sir. They're not equivalent in size or number.
Another way is the per capita numbers would be different.
Correct.
Substantially different in terms of call volume.
Yes, sir, Councilman.
And Chief, I think that's an important point
Yeah.
Councilman Waring is bringing up, because it's not only a difference in population, but geographically speaking, Black Mountain, which also covers part of my district, is large geographically without streets that cut through it. So I think that would be helpful to have both of those numbers, geographic area as well as population. If you could update this slide and provide it to the subcommittee members, that would be great.
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chairman.
Yep.
I went out right along in Cactus Park, and one thing they emphasized to me was cutting across the freeway. Anybody who's gone across Indian School in the freeway or something like that, those are big intersections with a lot of moving parts, people flying off the freeway. That adds to the response time, because it's tough to get across those intersections. Black Mountain faces the same thing, with the 17. It's a little less congested. Those intersections are a little less than you would find further south, certainly along the 17. But to Councilwoman O'Brien's point, the layout of the streets and the grid system is less existent as you get further north, at least in some areas. So you can't just go zipping across like you might on Indian School with the sirens running. Now you got to go up here and down here and bounce around to get to your destination. It's not necessarily a linear path, which also exacerbates the problem. So those are things that I assume you're taking into account, but I well remember the officer telling me at Cactus Park that getting across the freeway actually impacts how they respond to calls, that was an issue because of the nature of those intersections. And during the day, those intersections are a nightmare. So just something to add into to your
yes.
already large pile of burdens. I'm sorry.
And part of that is impacted by rush hour traffic during the day and then in the afternoon, and trying to traverse those makes it even that much more difficult. Yes, sir. As we continue, as we look at response times, which is the big one here, most of the response times in the priority one, except for Central City again, because it's one squad area, are all within a minute of each other. Even with the Black Mountain and the expansive area that they cover, the response times are still within a minute of all the others. It's the priority two times that you can see that is the big discrepancy with which we're trying to impact the most we can. If you look at Maryville Estrella Mountain, it is approximately 16 minutes longer there than anywhere else. Ancillary to that, this morning we had a priority two call hold in Maryville for about almost 6 hours. It was 5 hours and 48 minutes. And when you're facing the worst time of your life and you call 911 and it takes us 5 hours to get there, that's not acceptable. And we need to, that's what the watch commander's job is to do, is try to impact that, try to cut down that time and make it quicker so that we are responding to our citizens in the fashion that they deserve. The difference between a watch commander and a shift commander, the shift commanders are lieutenants, and as of now and historically with us, they have focused on the precinct area itself. I can tell you when I was a lieutenant in Maryville, I would have anywhere from 20 to 35, close to 40 calls holding, and I would never think to ask for help because I just thought that's the way it is, and I'm just supposed to handle my business within my own precinct. What the watch shift commander does is allows that watch commander who's got a global perspective to see where the calls are in the city to be able to move those resources to help them out without them even having to ask for that assistance. So that's kind of the difference between it, is the focus that you have on your area. As a lieutenant, I'm focused on my precinct only and moving resources within that. The watch commander concept, which we've had for a very long time, is focused globally on the whole city and how we can impact the city as a whole and get calls for service down in a quicker fashion. Here's how the resources are moved more likely than not. Maryville's holding calls for an extended time. Cactus Park has fewer calls than Maryville. Black Mountain has the fewest calls holding. So in that case, the resources would move from Black Mountain to Cactus Park. Then the corresponding numbers of resources that went over from Black Mountain to Cactus Park would then move down to Maryville and manage that for a short period of time.
Can you remind me of the shared boundary between Cactus Park and Black Mountain? Like, where is that cutoff?
It goes down to, I think, the 19th Avenue and Union Hills. So it would be all the way up to the top part of it and then down to 19th Avenue and Union Hills off of 17.
Gotcha, which is our shared border, basically.
Yeah.
Obviously, for anybody who's familiar, the actual precinct, the actual police office is up at Carefree Highway and Cave Creek Road, basically. I'd have to think about, like, how long would it take you to drive from Union Hills just to get back to, like, check out for the day? So you're saying you wouldn't pull somebody who was patrolling up by Carefree Highway. You'd look for folks that are down by 19th and Union Hills already and then have them pop a little further south or west?
So normally how that works, Councilman Waring, is that the watch commander would contact the shift commander, the lieutenant, say, hey, can you give me 2 units to move over to 900, and then let that lieutenant decide where those resources are coming from and how he wants to move them over.
Because depending on where they're coming from, I mean, just the travel time alone, unless they happen to be right by the 17, then that might be a different, assuming it's not rush hour, as you suggested earlier. If it's 8 o'clock in the morning, good luck with that. But, it could take them an hour to get there. There's an accident or something. But, all right, well, this is kind of exactly what I envisioned, the distances that we're talking about. And I sort of figured this might be the typical, you're going to be moving people. You're probably not moving them straight south to Desert Horizon. You're probably moving them over towards Cactus Park.
At times we have moved them to Desert Horizon as well.
Pardon?
There are times, sir, where we have moved them to Desert Horizon as well.
Yeah, I suppose. But, I mean, again, I would almost think that's probably so Desert Horizon can shift resources even further south, because they go down to Camelback, I think.
Correct.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, that precinct, for people who aren't familiar, is basically a Greenway and 56th Street, but they cover the area between the 101 or the Scottsdale Road and the 17, right, all the way down to Camelback.
Correct.
It's sort of a rectangle, if I remember.
Right.
So, I mean, again, that's a big area with a lot of stoplights, a lot of intersections. If you're trying to hustle back, that's going to be a challenge. So, all right. Well, thank you for this. It's helpful anyway to see what's being planned or done, I guess.
Yes, sir. So example 1 here is one where they are moved to Desert Horizon. On September 22nd At about 12:30, Desert Rising Precinct has approximately 30 calls holding. They have several suspects in custody in a major scene, so their calls are just going to continue to stack. The watch commander sends 2 units from Black Mountain to assist until 2:30 when shift 2 now becomes available and they can start stabilizing their precinct. The other officers return back to their precincts in time to secure without incurring any overtime. Example 2, October of this past month, in Maryville Precinct, 42 calls holding, working a homicide scene and a second scene as well. Mountain View has 4 calls holding. A watch commander sends 2 units from Mountain View over to help there because they have an adjoining border. They cover for a couple hours until shift 2 signs on, and then they return back to their home as well. Those are some of the common ones that are out there. The secondary benefit to this watch commander model, it allows the precinct's commanders to focus on the day-to-day operations. That way they don't have to monitor the radios while they're in meetings or doing presentations. They're able to process their paperwork in the precinct in a more timely fashion, giving them more time to interact with their precincts itself. So the community benefit watch commander concept, we've used it for decades. We've used it usually on night shift. The concept hasn't changed. It's been successfully used since before I came on, which is back in '92. This just formalized moving it to the day as well. Formerly it used to be called the duty commander. We just call it watch commander, changed the verbiage a little bit. It expands the previous concepts of equitably distributing the responses to all the citizens across the city. It benefits the public by improving response times when they are needed the most. With limited number of first responders, the program is designed to assist balancing police services throughout the city. It's only a stopgap while we continue to investigate long-term and more stable solutions to our staffing issues and staffing problems. We had a staffing meeting today with a patrol staff meeting, which are looking at long-term solutions with involves our labor unions, our members and on all different levels, trying to help solve for these problems long-term, but this is only a stopgap. Are there additional questions?
So thank you for the presentation, Assistant Chief Elmore. I want to echo some of the concerns of Councilman Waring in that I applaud you all for finding a stopgap to reduce the wait times. I don't want anybody to have to wait 6 hours when it's a bad day. I do, though, want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that really means we're not just having officers spend 30 minutes to an hour driving to get places. So you made a comment about, the plan or the guides are to just move them from one precinct to another, but sometimes they skip over that. And I hope that you will further implement that. They shouldn't be skipping over whole precincts, because then what we're having, and what would seem to me, is people driving. And then it might look good on paper that we're moving resources, but if we're not actually addressing the call volume, we're not really helping folks. You said this started a couple of months ago. Can you let us know what, if not today, just shoot us all an email, what the exact start date was? How long do we plan to run the pilot?
There's no indefinite time on the pilot as of yet, as we're still looking for those long-term solutions to solve the issue.
So then I would ask that at the 6-month mark, we receive an update about how is it impacting these call response times that you've provided us with. And hopefully, had an opportunity to make sure we're shifting folks appropriately so we're not just driving. Councilman Garcia, do you have any questions?
No questions from me. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, Councilman.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here, sir. Great. We will now move on to the Phoenix Police Department hiring, recruitment, and attrition monthly report. For that, we have Assistant Chief Brian Chapman.
Good morning. I'll just jump into our total staffing numbers as an update from last month. Currently have 2,590 sworn filled positions, 75 police recruits in the academy, 953 officers working in patrol, and 36 officers in training. Those are officers that have graduated the academy, currently assigned to field training officer positions out in precincts. And we have an additional 121 transitional duty officers, not included in this number, who are on medical, military leave, or temporary assignments within the department. I wanted to provide an overview snapshot of attrition from the last 5 years, so we had a better idea of where we have been and where we currently are. As you can see, attrition has outpaced hiring since 2020, and before that I would argue that it was keeping pace when we factor in attrition from the academy and the field training program. But as you can see, in 2020 is where we really started to nosedive between attrition and hiring. And I know everybody knows that this was pandemic-related times, and hiring and recruiting efforts, not only at the Phoenix Police Department, but I would argue across law enforcement agencies across the country, were diminished significantly. In 2021, we had attrition rates of 271 with only hiring 91, and this year we have 243 known numbers for attrition through the end of the year that's planned thus far, and projected to hire 175. So while I would concede that this is not an immediate fix, you can see that we are trending appropriately in the right direction, and our plan for 2023 is to outpace what we have hired in 2022, and then hopefully diminish our attrition numbers. Some of that has been helped with the market adjustment and the longevity bonuses that have been approved. And so those have significantly helped us compared to last year, and we hope to build on that going forward. Just by way of overview, there's a lot to this slide, so I just want to show the commitment here that we've had to reaching out at least 2 times a month in a formalized testing process. People have attended written degree waivers. It's notable that by and large we have a show-up rate of about 50% for all of these. That is not indicative of anything in Phoenix. That is a nationwide standard. For whatever reason, a lot of people sign up and only about half of them attend the class, or attend the testing site on the day of. Also wanted to say we had 133 total to the academy year to date. We have 42 tracking for our December class, which is notably up. 175 total for 2022, and if we hit our projections of 35 in a class, we should be back up to 315 by 2023. I will say this is optimistic that if we hit this number by 2023, but that is a best case scenario, and that's what we have the capacity to train for currently at the academy. What are we doing right now? As you may recall, earlier this year we started a pilot program for academic waivers for anybody that has an associate's or bachelor's degree. That has been wildly successful from our perspective in terms of the response that we have seen. We are also in the middle of the final approval stages for our Skill Bridge program from the Department of Defense and the military, which should be fully implemented on board in next year. And as a direct result of, I would like to say specifically the academic waiver program, we no longer have people who have those academic waivers attend the testing sites. So that's why those testing numbers have gone down. And so when we look at what we're really bringing into a testing 2 times a month, we're looking at the applicant pool of where we have. And I know I've talked to the subcommittee previously about some pilot programs related to perhaps just doing an oral board or trying to do something that's not capturing some of those people that can't successfully pass this written test for whatever reason. And so in concert with the human resources from the city, we are going to increase our pre-screen questionnaire as a main filter as opposed to our written test. And this is notable just from perspective. When you sign up to take the test in the city of Phoenix, you have to, you are given a pre-screen that are AZ Post-related questions that have to do with limited drug history and criminal history. In order to even attend the test, you have to pass through that filter. What we're going to do is make that a more robust filter, and by way of an example, in this first pre-screen question, it was, have you had any marijuana usage in the last 3 years? Now, those are a lot more detailed in terms of all drugs of choice, abuse of prescription drugs. These are in sync with what Arizona Post requires as a minimum standard. So we're going to increase that pre-screen questionnaire as the main filter and eliminate the written test just to see if we have the capacity to bring in more folks to the hiring process. By way of numbers, we would have had the ability this year to bring in an additional 500 people who didn't pass our written test but may have passed this main filter questionnaire and could make good peace officers, but because they haven't passed the written test, it's disqualified them. And so we're trying to be as creative and innovative as we can to increase that hiring pool. Of note, though, things like personality assignment, aggression assessment, implicit bias, academic aptitude, these are all evaluated during the background investigations and during psychological evaluations as well. In addition to this December pilot program, we will be able to re-engage citizen review of our applicants. That has been on pause as a direct result of the pandemic in terms of being able to meet together. So we're going to re-engage that process so we have citizen input on the applicants that we bring forward. And what the ultimate goal is to expand the hiring pool. What we're not looking to do, and I want to be crystal clear about this, is lowering standards. What we want to do is evaluate everybody who has a desire to do this job, make sure they filter through the AZ Post questionnaire, meet our standards and background, and then have an opportunity to attend the academy. We're in the business of bringing new applicants and recruits into this, and this is going to be a way for us to do that. I would also say, for information, that testing processes are initially used as a filter. Back in the days when we had 1,000 people testing for our department, we needed a significant filter to reduce that down and the impact on what would be our Employment Services Bureau. We are currently not in that position, but what we can do is pivot to something that is more realistic for us right now, go back to a written test filter when that hiring pool becomes a little more robust than what it currently is. I can't sit here and forecast for you that will be in February or March. I would rather it be in December, but that's not the reality. So we have to pivot and be innovative in any way we can to bring people into the fold. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councilman Waring.
I usually ask a lot of questions on this, but I think this spoke for itself. The history was helpful. We've seen versions of it before, but seeing it laid out like that, whatever happened in 2020, we got to undo it and try to get people to apply. And I appreciate the fact that you're trying to use different tactics to achieve that goal. Thank you.
Councilman Garcia.
Nothing from me. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chief Chapman. Appreciate the information and do appreciate, like Councilman Waring said, those numbers right there in black and white showing the history over the years. So thank you. Look forward to future updates.
Thank you.
All right. And last but not least, our prosecutor's office diversion programs. And for that, we have our Community Bureau Chief Gomez and Diversion Unit Administrator Aldaco. I apologize if I mispronounced that. Oh, shoot. Good morning, and thank you. I think it's still good morning. A few minutes left. Thank you for being with us and for your patience.
That's correct. Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair. My name is Esteban Gomez. I am the Bureau Chief for our Community Bureau. Today we have Narda Adalco, our Diversion Administrator here, that's going to present on our 7 diversion programs.
Is it on now?
Yes, we can hear you
Perfect.
now. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to start with an overview of our programs. We do oversee 7 of the programs thus far. The first one was implemented in 1986 with our domestic violence program, and we've added 6 since then. I am going to do an overview of what the process looks like for a participant as they go through the process. Their case is diverted from the court. This provides them an opportunity to not have a criminal record. They have their assessment and their intakes completed by the contracted provider. Any additional requirements may be added by a prosecutor. Now, each of the programs have their own criteria and their own requirements to be eligible for the program. Our unit does review each of the participants to make sure they meet the appropriate requirements and are able to enroll in the appropriate program. They enroll in the program by signing a plea agreement, and they must admit guilt. They are required to be actively participating in the program. They are provided a future court date, so they have enough time to complete the requirements of the program. They are all held accountable while they are in the program. This is a must and a requirement. If they are successful, their case is dismissed. However, if they are not, their sentence will be executed and they serve any required jail days that they have. All of the programs except PDP or their prostitution program have a fee, and this must be paid in order for them to participate. There are options for participants if they have access, and a sliding scale based on their income is also available and provided for by the provider. Now, these are the providers that we have available, 5 of our programs.
Hold on 1 second. Sorry, we have a question from Councilman Waring.
Oh.
So thank you for this. I understand, the goals and everything. In a previous life, I worked at the state and worked a lot on the domestic violence issue. That one's concerning because, of course, that could just be the tip of the iceberg, whatever the one call for service or whatever it was that led the person to be in court. The history might be something much worse and unknowable. How do you adjust for that? Is there, I would hate to find out after the fact that somebody was put through, I guess, a lesser process or diversion where it turns out that they've been doing some horrible things for a long time and that wasn't known. How do we know that someone is really fixable? I don't know what the word would be.
So I can answer a part. Thank you, Madam Chair and Councilman Waring. So the program is meant primarily for participants who have done their first offense as a misdemeanor charge. There are eligible criteria if there is, for example, a felony charge. They do not qualify for the program. This is primarily for first offense misdemeanor charges.
Can I interject there? I apologize. So I don't know or don't remember. Like, what would be the difference between a domestic violence misdemeanor charge and a domestic violence felony charge? Like, what kind of activity, what would be the dividing line? What would a misdemeanor look like versus a felony? Maybe that's the way to phrase it.
Misdemeanors generally have lesser injury, maybe less aggravated. We have Class 1s, Class 2, and Class 3 misdemeanors. All of them depend on various natures. Some involve that an injury occurs, some involve that no injury took place. So a felony would be aggravated situations. Use of a weapon, those types of natures.
Oh, okay, so you're right, Madam Chair, not to use the felony, not to have the felony be in diversion, but that one just bothers me. I'll just say it that way. You're nodding your head, so I think you can understand why it's concerning. Have we had any instances where someone got diversion and then later did something terrible, murdered somebody or got a felony later? Or there probably are examples, I assume. But, I mean, do we have any statistics on how often that kind of thing happens?
Not at the top of my head. We receive the the cases that are sent to our program afterwards, if they are charged again, they're not eligible for the program. They must serve their required jail days and or any other requirements.
And that's good, but Madam Chair, I would suggest you start tracking that for sure. You know, how often does this happen? Basically, that's another way of saying how successful are we being with this? You know, because that's just concerning to me. You know, if it's gotten to that point where you're already injuring your spouse, loved one, significant other, kid, that's a bad, dark path. It's probably not the first time this has ever happened. And the idea that you're going to turn off that behavior that you clearly can't control just seems problematic to me. So I get the spirit with which it's intended, so it's not criticism of you or the program or anything, but I would at least like to know how many repeat offenders do we have coming out of the diversion program. I don't think that's an unreasonable request, and I would hope it's easily accessible data too. Because if somebody comes back, they're going back and looking and saying, this person's already had diversion, they're not eligible for it again. So somebody's got to be notified about that somewhere. It's clearly knowable information. It's just compiling it. I'd be curious what that information looks like, or those statistics look like. So thank you. I'm not trying to make it work for you, but I think it's something that would be helpful to know.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Councilman Waring.
Madam Chair and Councilman Waring, Bob Smith, City Prosecutor. If I could just follow up on that. We have access as prosecutors to...
Mm-hmm. Does he have, sorry, I don't think is your mic on?
Okay, can you hear me?
Thank
Sorry,
you.
Madam Chair, Councilman Waring. To follow up on the question and the answer, we have access to the individual's criminal history. As prosecutors, we have that unique access through law enforcement criminal history, and we're able to look and see if they've had a charge before, even if they've been convicted. And so to follow up on Mr. Gomez's point, a felony would also be if they've had 2 prior convictions for domestic violence, they can be referred to the county attorney for felonies. And to be clear, we don't handle any felony matters unless it's a class 6 felony turned down to us. But an individual, we look at all that history, they wouldn't be eligible if it was a young victim, serious injury. But to your point of if somebody's gone on from diversion and eventually down the road in life committed homicide, we definitely can look at that. I'm not aware, I mean, that's a very rare extreme circumstance that somebody would have such a hidden history, but it can happen. I mean, we only have access to what's been reported to police in the past. Let's say, hypothetically, somebody had convicted or committed a serious domestic violence in another state, and that wasn't in their federal database. It should be, but as what Narda said, it's only individuals that are misdemeanor, lower level crime that are eligible for this, but we will look into that.
So, Madam Chair, I assume that prosecutors have access to the data. I recognize that, you know, you could be committing crimes in other states and maybe, you know, computer glitches and record keeping. It's not going to be perfect. You got trillions of bytes of data bouncing around. It's not always going to be perfect. If you're getting arrested for this and it turns out, you know, you did it, you know, you're pleading or whatever, you know, that's really under no circumstances is that minor. I'm sure there are people who are wrongly convicted, but, you know, for the most part, if you're pleading, you probably did something you shouldn't have been doing. It's just not acceptable. And so at the very least, what I'm not looking for is whether prosecutors know. It's like, really what I'm looking for is with this particular crime, are we doing any good in this particular area? If half these people who had diversions are subsequently getting arrested again, then you know what? Get rid of the program and prosecute the hell out of the initial crime, would be my advice. Because at some point it falls in a different category than underage drinking, which is bad. The underage drinker could be drunk and kill somebody in a DUI. There are lots of different but by and large, I don't really put those two things in the same category. Not even close. And so I guess that would be my concern. So in this one instance, tracking this, I just think would be helpful just to know going forward. maybe just for me, but I would think for you guys, is this something that we want to continue? Yes, I understand, somebody subsequently committing a murder is certainly an extreme circumstance, but I would guess that a lot of people who commit murders on and I think the domestic violence definition, isn't that someone who lives in your household or is related to you? I can't remember which how is that determined that it's not, I murdered my friend who lives down the street? It's somebody who cohabitates with you? Is that the...
Right. Madam Chair, Councilman Waring, members of the subcommittee, to be domestic violence, it would be, as you said, but it goes far. It's been expanded to a romantic relationship. If somebody's been in a dating relationship before, you can be related. It could be a grandparent. There's certain familiar relationships that qualify. And just back up, I didn't mean to indicate minor. What I was trying to get at is a felony versus a misdemeanor.
Right.
And to assure you, we do extensive review, and it's the prosecutor who decides that they even get to go see a provider and lets them enter that plea agreement. We take a harsh line on domestic violence, Councilman, and they're not going to go through the program if they have any sort of history. And the history would show arrests. It doesn't just show convictions. We can look at if somebody, let's say, never went to a prosecution stage, but they're arrested multiple times, that shows up on their history. We're going to take it into account. This individual is down that road to what you're getting at of a serious pattern of violent behavior. Even if they've never been convicted, we're not going to let them go through diversion.
I mean, I would argue, Madam Chair, you've been in 3 bar fights, and now this is the first domestic situation. So you're looking at all that.
Yes.
I mean, really, I want to make sure that really you're sure. It sounds like you're scrutinizing every case. You're not applying this for every misdemeanor. You're sorting in only the ones where you think it could make a difference.
Correct.
Is that what I'm hearing? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, I will belabor it no longer, but thank you. It's something I feel strongly about. So when I saw that up there, I just, again, I'm not criticizing. It sounds like you're on top of it, so I'll leave it there. But I appreciate you hearing me out. But please use the strictest standards and pay the most attention. I'm sure you are. But so thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you?
So we have the 2 providers that we currently have are SAGE and Catholic Charities. 5 of our programs are under SAGE. We have underage drinking, domestic violence, anger management, also known as Positive Alternative, our cognitive skills, and our shoplifting program. And then under Catholic Charities, we have our solicitation and our prostitution programs. The contracts are under them through RFP, and they can last anywhere between 3 to 5 years with the possibility of an extension. And our team is responsible for the procurement process. Now I will start going over the stats for each of the programs. We have stats for 2021 fiscal year as well as 21-22. This shows the amount of participants that were ordered in and the amount of participants that were successful each year. So for 2021, we have a 74% success rate. And then for 21-22 fiscal year, we have a 95% success rate. Now the purpose of the program, it's a counseling program for the offenders to stop the cycle of violence by teaching non-violent behaviors. Now their options for the counseling can range anywhere between 26 to 52 sessions overall, and each of the sessions lasts for 2 hours. Now, this is determined by the individual intake that's assessed by the provider, how many sessions are required for the participant. Now, the program may also include substance abuse if it is required. And next we have our PAP, or our Positive Alternative. This is also known as our Anger Management Program. We have our stats for 2021 at 80%, and then 21-22 also at 80%. It was a plus or minus 0.5, rounded up to 80%. Now the purpose of the program is to provide tools to stop the assaultative and threatening behavior for participants in non-domestic violence cases. Examples of cases that can go to this program would be assault, disorderly conduct through a fight, and or threatening behavior as a few examples. Same for the counseling, can range anywhere between 10 to 20 of the sessions required, and those last for 2 hours each. Next, we have our cognitive skills. This is mostly for behavioral therapy, and it provides an opportunity to explore alternative thinking patterns to help offenders to make a better life choice. The counseling here can range anywhere between 10 to 20, and these also last for 2 hours. Our success rate for 2021 is 79%, and that did increase for 21-22 at an 87%. This program may also include substance abuse services if they are deemed a requirement. Next, we have our shoplifting and or theft diversion. For 2021, we do have an 80% success rate. 21-22 does show 101%. We are aware that that stat is over 100%. The reason that this may occur is we review our stats by a fiscal year. So if there is a defendant that was enrolled in a prior month before a fiscal year began, but they were not able to complete the program, or they re-enrolled, or they required an extension, that is then added to our stats for the next fiscal year, and that is why we see a successful rate of 270 for 21-22, although 267 were ordered. The 3 of them were in the prior fiscal year. Now, the program is an educational program. This also assists in trying to identify any stressful or problem areas in their lives. It does provide an educational toolbox for the defendants. The class is a 1-day, 8-hour educational class, and it provides tools to make a positive change in their life. Next, we have our underage drinking and alcohol possession. The program is treatment-based and or educational as well, based on the assessment. As we can see for 2021, we have a 73% success rate. And for 21-22, we have an increase at a 78%. This is also a full 1-day, 8-hour class, or they may also attend an alcohol treatment group. Next, we have our prostitution solicitation diversion program. We have quite a few more stats on here. For fiscal year 2021, we have 88%, and then 21-22, we see a slight decrease at 64%. The change from 2021 to 21-22 was due to COVID and trying to transition from an in-person to a hybrid. And then other factors as well. This explains the drop from 2021 to 21-22. Now, our PDP and our PSD, or prostitution solicitation or prostitution diversion, are the only programs that have required jail days to serve, which is why we have our jail cost savings down here for fiscal year 2021 at $276,416. And then fiscal year 21-22, $311,382. Now, the purpose of the program for solicitation is also to educate the offenders to stop the behavior of going out to solicit or hire another person to commit acts of prostitution. The educational classes focus on the participant that was charged with the offense of soliciting for prostitution. Now, I do want to mention that we are currently reviewing an evaluation of all of our programs. The last study that was done for this program specifically was conducted in 2011. We are currently working on a plan to conduct a study for all of our programs. For prostitution diversion, we also have our fiscal year stats for 2021 at a 90%, 21-22 at a 63%, The same reason COVID was a factor. This does affect our stats for a slight decrease here. And then we also have our jail cost savings for fiscal year 2021 as well as fiscal year 21-22. Now, the purpose of the program for prostitution is to offer rehabilitation services for our participants. This does focus on support and education and treatment to end the life of prostitution. They are required to attend a minimum of 10 group sessions, and they are for life skills, beyond trauma, addictive behavior, and they also attend a week-long educational group seminar. I do want to mention for this program and for our solicitation program as well that they are charge-based. So you are, if you are charged with either soliciting and or prostitution, that is a program that you attend. It is not based on your race or background and or gender identity. It is based on the charge. So if you go out and you solicit, then you are going to be attending, and you are offered a plea, then you will be attending the solicitation class. If you are charged with prostitution, you will be attending the prostitution class. Now, restitution is part of the plea agreement. The provider is made aware of the amount that is due, and it is tracked by both the provider and our team. Any questions?
Thank you for the presentation. I am happy that the programs will be reevaluated for success. I think that that's really important for us to see, as Councilman Waring was touching on. I'd really like to see recidivism as part of our calculation of success. So it's great to see that who actually completes and graduates from the programs, but I'd like to know in 12 months, 24 months, 36 months down the road, are we seeing some of these folks back in our system? And I realize it sounds like, based on the original description, they wouldn't be eligible for the diversion program, but it's not really diverting them. It's not really success that they just completed. Success is we didn't have them come back through our system in the next 3 to 5 years, in my opinion. And so I hope we'll add that to the calculation for it. Councilman Waring.
If I could just give an example, it's not one that you have provided, and it's dated information, but I know in the past with DUIs, there are programs and stuff that go along with that. 8% got another DUI within a calendar year. So if you completed the program, but then you got another DUI within the calendar year, that's not success. So I think your point is well taken. It's not one that you guys, I think, are dealing with, but I think you take my point that that's not good. So you're definitely not, the program didn't work for you, even if you completed classes.
Right. So that would be very helpful.
And
yes, sir.
Madam Chair and Councilman Waring and members of the subcommittee, yes, we will definitely put that in the scope of the study, the request to look at recidivism. We'd like to know that as well. So we appreciate that point.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate the information and explanation of all the diversion programs, and look forward to seeing you all back here after you have the study and more information. So appreciate your time this morning. With that, do we have any call to the public?
Madam Chair, we do not.
Okay, are there any future agenda item requests? All right, hearing none, we are adjourned.
Facilities have been built, and I think it just shows that the quality of a space and a work environment is incredibly important. I know law school is very, very expensive. I considered it at one point myself and never ended up going. And so the fact that, our public